Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is the Monday, November 16th, 2020 study meeting of the Bloomington City Council. I would like to call it to order at this time. Start the meeting with the roll call. Ms. Christensen, if you could please call the roll of the council.
Thank you. Councilmember Beloga?
Aye. Here.
Councilmember Carter?
Here.
Councilmember Coulter?
Present.
Councilmember Lohman?
Here.
Councilmember Martin?
Present.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Mayor Bussey?
Here. All 7 members of the Bloomington City Council are present this evening, which brings us to item 2, which is our approval of agenda. And I would like to make a couple of alterations to this evening's agenda, if that would be acceptable to the council. I would like to start as we have planned with item 3.1, which is our emergency declaration. Then move to item 3.2 and move the CBAC recommendation and the budget discussion for item 3.2, which would then move item 3.3, the park system master plan, down one. So that would be item 3.3. And then we had a petition today requesting a recount of the ballots related to question number 3 regarding ranked choice voting on our most recent election. So I would like to add that as item 3.4, which is the recount petition. And then item 3.5, which is our council policy and issues update. So again, to recap, 3.1 would be the emergency declaration, 3.2 CBAC recommendation and budget, 3.3 park system master plan, 3.4 recount petition, which is a new walk-on item, and 3.5 council policy issues and update.
Second from Councilmember Lohman.
We got a motion and a second to amend the agenda as stated. Council, any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Christensen.
Thank you. Beloga?
Aye.
Carter?
Aye.
Coulter?
Aye.
Lohman?
Aye.
Martin?
Aye.
Nelson? Mayor Bussey?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. We have an amended agenda for this evening's meeting as stated. Item 3.1 on that agenda is our emergency declaration. And on Friday of this week, I signed an official emergency declaration for the city of Bloomington based on the situation regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. I signed it Friday afternoon. That type of mayoral emergency declaration can last 3 days. And so we're bringing it in front of the council tonight to extend that emergency declaration. Mr. Verbrugge or Dr. Kelly, anything to discuss as we head into this? Mr. Verbrugge?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Good evening. As the mayor stated, the declaration, in order to continue, will need council support. And Dr. Nick Kelly, our acting public health administrator, is here this evening just to set the context of why we feel it is necessary to reinitiate the emergency declaration. We had allowed it to lapse at the end of June, with full recognition at that time that as conditions changed and things necessitated, we could reinitiate the declaration, and we believe that we have reached that point. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kelly, have him walk through some of the recent trend data that we're seeing and the facts that are contributing to this recommendation, and then we can bring it back for discussion. Nick?
Good evening, Dr. Kelly. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Before you can see the map of the United States, looking at the data from the COVID exit strategy showing uncontrolled spread in almost every state in the union. We are continuing on this dangerous trajectory. This slide shows you what's going on here in Bloomington. As Jamie just highlighted, the emergency declaration ended in June. In June, we were on a downward trajectory. We were approaching a 7-day average in the teens per 100,000 cases over a 7-day average. Right now, as of November 7th, so there's about a 7-day lag, a 6-day lag, our cases per 100,000 is at 81 for a 7-day average. The highest we saw so far in this pandemic has been right around 20. So we are about 4 times the rate of spread in the community than we have seen at any other point in this pandemic. And it is rapidly accelerating. That's what we look at as uncontrolled spread fueled by exponential growth. That is starting to strain and challenge our healthcare system and our capacities across the state to manage the pandemic. As the governor talked about today, we've seen hospital capacity skyrocket across the Midwest over the last 10 days. And the state of Minnesota is on track to hit 300,000 cases of COVID before Thanksgiving, which originally we didn't think was going to happen until after Thanksgiving, potentially, and not until early December. The growth is accelerating, and it's going to require some pretty substantial changes in how we behave as a state, as a community, to get this thing under control. When we look at this a little bit more granular in Bloomington, we are seeing increases in every age group. Of note, the state talked about today that one of the drivers of continued outbreaks are especially youth athletics, and approximately 10% of cases in that youth age population are associated with athletics. While our athletic programs are doing phenomenal work, and many of them have spent countless hours doing preparedness plans and strategies to keep their youth athletes safe, just like our school districts have, to keep our students safe, the conditions in the field right now have changed dramatically. When we look at the data for the 3 cities we serve, Bloomington, Edina, and Richfield, in October, 21% of our high school age or our school age children between 5 and 18 had an exposure in sports that helped precipitate their COVID infection. Half of them were asymptomatic. The screening processes, the tools we had just were not able to detect it. That's concerning as we're looking at how that impacts community spread at the community level and how we can get our kids back in school. We continue to see that disproportional impact in our BIPOC community. It's most pronounced right now in our Latino, our Hispanic community. We're also seeing that increase in our Black non-Hispanic and our white non-Hispanic communities. It is growing in every facet of our society, every age, every race, and ethnicity. One of the realities of this pandemic is I can't tell you with certainty who's going to get sick and have a negative outcome and who's not going to have a negative outcome. What we do know is that the older you are, the more likely you are to have those negative outcomes. And we are seeing outbreaks starting to kick off in our long-term care. That is because of community transmission impacting the staff that serve those facilities. Just the same way we're seeing that impact our school and other business operations, the higher the community spread is, the more challenging it is to operate in the way we have been with our robust COVID plans in the past. Things are rapidly getting worse, and they are going to need swift action at the state level and at the local level to control the spread as we move into holidays, where we expect accelerated growth as people travel and gather indoors with family members in the coming weeks. I'll turn it back over to you, Jamie. That was my COVID data update.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I think at this point it's fine to turn it over for questions if the council has any, and staff can address those before considering the action.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly, and thank you, Mr. Verbrugge. Questions? I see Councilmember Coulter, then Councilmember Carter. Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, I know that the result that COVID has had, Dr. Kelly talked about it in terms of the broader community, but I'm wondering if, Jamie, if you could talk a little bit about sort of the direct impact to how the city of Bloomington has or can provide services that COVID, the effect that COVID has had on that, because I think that also very much relates to this discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Coulter, Mr. Mayor and council members. One of the one of the facts is that we're experiencing this just like the general population, at least the city employees are. And so we have a number of staff who are either testing positive or are in quarantine periods because of potential exposure. That's having the effect of causing some strain on our ability to provide customer service in certain areas within our municipal buildings that people come to. And it is also having an effect on our staff who work in the field in multiple departments. So one of the things that we're very attentive to here is being able to manage through from a staff perspective and make sure that we're covering the needs throughout the community. Frankly, the one that is concerning to me for the resident experience is the customer service we're able to provide in the city buildings. If we don't have the folks who can handle the walk-up traffic, that's one of those issues that would cause us to look at our operating hours or our accessibility to the public until we can assure that we have some staffing predictability. And then obviously the other departments are continuing to manage and monitor to make sure that we have staffing in public safety and public works to adequately deliver service. We haven't seen it get to what I would say is a crisis stage yet, but we certainly are concerned with some of the numbers that we're seeing right now. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Coulter?
Yes, thank you. And I have some other thoughts I would like to share, but I think some other folks may have questions, so I can hold off on that.
Councilmember Carter.
I actually had the exact same question as Councilmember Coulter, so I'm good.
Thank you. Councilmember Lohman.
So then, one question that I have, just for the general public, city managers, could you just let folks know kind of what powers this allows you and the mayor to kind of do just generally? Some folks are not exactly clear as to what this means in terms of when we pass this. I know we did this in the past, but it's been quite so many months ago. So if you could just give a kind of a brief overview of what this means and what impact this has.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohman. Mayor and council members, the effect of the declaration is to actually initiate the emergency management plan for the city. And in circumstances like these, the authority that's given to the city manager and or the emergency manager is to be able to move more expeditiously as necessary if there are needs to acquire things that normally we'd have to go through some sort of a competitive bidding process or something along those lines. It also allows the city manager to be flexible with things like human resources policies, and then frankly, just the decision-making regarding facilities and our operating posture and the hours of availability to make sure that we can continue to meet the expectations of the residents. As we did before, when we had the emergency declaration March through June, I will report back to the council on any actions that are taken by the emergency manager or me under the auspices of the declaration to make sure that the council and the community is fully informed.
Thank you, Mayor and City Manager. I think that if folks were to go back and to look at that process in which we followed before, which gives me complete confidence in this process moving forward. I don't remember there being anything we had serious questions about during that period of time, and I think we should feel confident to be able to move forward with this current declaration.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lohman. I'd seen similar questions on social media and heard similar questions from a couple of folks, but Mr. Verbrugge hit it right on the head. Basically, this is it allows the city manager and our emergency operations director, Yuli Seal, to move more quickly is basically what it does in terms of purchasing, notices for ordinances, staffing, building hours. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. It lets us be more nimble and to react more quickly when issues arise and to react more quickly and more effectively and appropriately without necessarily going through the regular channels of a 2-week posting or the information that has to get out. And I think you're exactly right, Councilmember Lohman. We saw it. We had this in place from March until June, and actually it ran very well and was very effective and I think useful for the city. And I think it would be, I think it's absolutely necessary to move back into that, into this declaration now, based on what we're seeing with the numbers and the practical realities, how it's affecting the city and how it's affecting our staffing and potentially eventually building hours and so on. Council, additional questions?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, just one more point for residents who may be wondering if what we're doing is outside of the norm of what other municipalities are doing, and the answer to that is squarely not. As I shared with the council, many of our peer cities never linked off their emergency declaration or allowed it to lapse, that they've been operating under that declaration for most of this year. We took a more nuanced approach to it throughout the year and feel that it is appropriate at this point to return back to that status.
Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't see anybody else jumping up for questions, so I just want to offer a few thoughts. And we've all seen the numbers, and I think it's really, really easy to get lost in numbers. But it's clear that they all point in one direction. It's bad, and it's only going to get worse. And I don't know how many of you watched the press conference today, but when the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Health refers to something as terrifying, personally, I find that quite terrifying. We know, of course, that COVID is not only threatening to overwhelm our healthcare system, but also, as the city manager mentioned, our city government's ability to provide basic services to our residents. And I don't think we need to go into the weeds too much here and now. I just sort of want to take this opportunity to encourage all of us, really, to not be afraid to do what we need to do to protect our community and do our part to get control of COVID. This declaration does provide the kind of authority and flexibility to respond appropriately. And I just want to very much encourage you, Mayor, and the city manager and Chief Seal to not be afraid to do so. And I would say that even aside from the authority granted in this declaration, I think we as a city council need to think boldly and creatively about what we can do to respond to this crisis. And I think we would all agree that we should leave no stone unturned when we're talking about the health and safety of our neighbors. And the last thing I would say is this, and I want to be as crystal clear on this as possible. The responsibility for getting control of this virus and doing what we can to get back to normal, it does not just fall to those of us on government payroll. We've heard a lot over the last few months, I would say too much, about personal responsibility. And there are always going to be those things that we're just simply going to have to choose, that we can't enforce. But I think what we also need to talk about is interpersonal responsibility, the responsibility that we have to each other as neighbors and members of a community. And, to me, that's one of the most sort of insidious things about this virus, is that it's not just about how the choices that we make affect us or the other folks in our households. If that were the case, we'd be in a very different place. The reality is that we aren't just making choices for ourselves. We're making choices for everyone else too. And we need to think, and I would say more importantly, act that way if we're ever going to get control of this situation. So with that, Mr. Mayor, unless there's anybody else chomping at the bit, I'm happy to make a motion.
Council, any additional comments? Councilmember Coulter. Oh, wait, Councilmember Carter has just raised her hand. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I just wanted to jump in and provide a couple of thoughts of my own, and I'll keep them pretty brief. First, I just want to say that, my heart goes out to the people who have been impacted in our community and beyond, whether they've lost a loved one or they are suffering from the symptoms, the consequences of COVID themselves. I also just want to acknowledge that this has been, our school board has been in a really challenging position as elected officials in our community, and the decisions that they're making about, whether or not to have kids in school and school sports, youth sports. And I just want to say that, as a parent with little kids, I want more than anything for my kids to be back in school, and I want them to be playing sports and in dance class and all of that. But I think the reality is that we have to really, accept right now as a community, and it's so hard, is that our kids are not going to be able to go back to school until we get this community spread under control. And I just want to say that I know it's really hard for people, and I know I've had a lot of parents reaching out to me directly about, frustrations and concerns, whether they think kids should be in school or should not go back to school until we have a vaccine. People are all over the board. And so I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I want to thank the city manager and the mayor for bringing this declaration back up, because it is critical now more than ever. And as somebody who's been directly impacted, I can tell you that this disease, this virus is it's so unpredictable, and we don't know what it's going to really do and how it's going to impact individuals and families in our community. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Councilmember Coulter to make the motion.
Council, anything else? Councilmember Coulter, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will move to approve a resolution providing City Council consent to Mayoral Declaration 2020-3 of a local emergency, extending the local emergency and authorizing certain actions.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Coulter and a second by Councilmember Carter to accept the emergency declaration. Further discussion, Council? Hearing none. Ms. Christensen.
Thank you. Beloga?
Aye.
Carter?
Aye.
Coulter?
Aye.
Lohman?
Aye.
Martin?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Mayor Buskey?
Aye. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you all very much for that, and thank you to our staff who are moving forward with this, and we'll take this on. And I know we do have we have some challenges ahead of us as a community. We have challenges ahead of us as a city, and individually and personally, we all have challenges as well. It's going to be a difficult 60 to 90 days here in the United States, certainly in the state of Minnesota, here in Bloomington. And as Councilmember Coulter said, it's going to come back to all of us to take the actions necessary to get this under control. And so let's work together. We're all in this together. Let's work together to get this under control. With that, we're going to move on to item 3.2 on our agenda, which, if you tuned in early, we had amended the agenda, and we moved up the Community Budget Advisory Committee recommendation and budget discussion. We moved that up from item 3.3 to item 3.2. And so we have Kari Carlson here from our budget office, and Mr. Verbrugge, and opening thoughts or comments on this as we kick off this discussion.
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, and council members. This evening, we are going to present again to the council and to community members who have been tracking this, where we stand in going into the 2021 budget year. As everyone in the council meeting understands, but I want to make sure folks who are watching also are aware that at the beginning of the pandemic, when we identified the financial challenges ahead, both for 2020 and then for 2021 budget, the decision was made in May to appoint a community budget advisory committee that would work with the staff and present options for budget reductions to the city council to make sure that the important voice of the community is reflected in some very difficult decisions that we know that the council and the city are facing as we go forward. And last meeting, we received the presentation from the co-chairs of the committee. Council had an opportunity to engage in some question and answer about the process and some of their thinking in presenting those options. Tonight is the opportunity to have discussion amongst the council about those options, and also to give staff direction on the tax levy, what the council's desire is as we go into the 2021 budget, and then certainly talk beyond 2021 as well if there are questions about what these budgeting decisions mean for the future. So at this time, I'm going to have our budget manager, Kari Carlson, walk through where we stand today as we go into 2021. And then I will come back at the end of her presentation and we'll turn it over to the mayor to facilitate that conversation amongst the city council. Kari?
Okay.
Good evening,
you,
Ms.
Jamie.
Carlson. Welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council. So what I'm going to go over is some information that was in the agenda packet and highlight some items that were in that packet about the general fund budget model and the tax levy for 21 and 22. And we have 3 different items that are shown before the budget reductions. And then we just use scenario A to just show you, if you just took scenario A the way that the committee presented it, what effect that would have on those 3 things with the general fund budget and then the tax levy for 21 and projected for 22. And just do a high-level review of the budget reduction scenarios that were presented. And then I'll turn it over to the city manager to talk about property tax impacts. So what I have here is, it is in the packet, and I think also you should have hard copies as well. There's a lot going on this budget model, but what I would like to highlight is just to kind of walk you through it. It shows the 2019 actuals, the revenues on the top and the expenses on the bottom for the general fund. And it has the 2020 original budget. And then to the right of that is the 2020 revised budget. And those revisions mainly are with anything that was carried over that wasn't spent in 2019 that was approved by the council, or encumbrances on purchase orders that were open at the end of 2019 that rolled over. Then we have our 2020 estimated. That's based on the last monthly financial report that was put together. And then we have the 2021 budget. And what this is on this model is before any of the reductions have come in. And what I'd like to highlight on here is what we're using for the admissions tax and lodging tax revenue that we've been talking about, how that's significantly reduced from what it usually is. We have 3 different forecasts that a team of employees are working on, and we get together about every 2 weeks. There's staff from community development and finance, assessing, which is in community development, but we are getting information from industry experts like the Smith Travel report and hotel valuation services, and plus all the information that we're getting in monthly with our lodging and admission tax returns, and have different scenarios of 21, 22, 23, 24, where we think it's going to take that long to get back to pre-pandemic levels. And what we're focusing the budget on, and what the Community Budget Advisory Committee recommended, is using that slow recovery. So not looking at a quick recovery or even moderate, but a very slow recovery for that coming back. And that's what we have plugged into the model and into the budget. And I'll also point out, if you are comparing in expenses for the 2020 budget which is the 2020 original budget, to the 2021 budget, a lot of the departments came in already under what the 2020 budget was. We do have, wherever possible, we had wage freezes for the 2021 budget, where you'll see some increases, like for example, in police, some public works, for police, that is mainly the police officers union and the police supervisors union. Those contracts were settled for their 2021 contract for the pandemic. So they do have some increases for that. And then the next slide, this is where it has the whole property tax levy laid out. So for 2020, the total property tax levy, the total dollar amount that was levied was 64.7 million. And a large part of that is what goes to the general fund for operations. But then there's some other funds as well that do require property tax support that are laid out there. And then also for our debt service that we have to pay, we have an amount that we levy for that as well. And this is what it looked like with the initial budget reductions. And some of this kind of moves around a little bit depending on how things change as we're working through the budget for the year. Also, I'll say our slow recovery for lodging tax has gotten a little worse from earlier in the year, and so that's reflected in here as well. And so if the preliminary tax levy, of course, is 5%, so that's the most it could be. But this is what it looks like before any of the reductions are taken. It would be a 7.45%. And then based on what happened with home valuations that the 2021 tax levy is going to be based on, that's actually, it's a 6.58% increase for the median value home. And then in the bottom right corner, it shows the dollar amounts that are going to be necessary to get to the tax levy increase that the council wishes to levy. And so, for example, the 5% is the highest it could be. That was what the preliminary was set at. That gap there is a $1,584,000 reduction. And just carrying that forward, again, this is without any budget reductions. So this isn't going to be the scenario that we end up with, but just to show you where we're starting from, this next slide has the 2022 projected tax levy. So there's a lot of assumptions in here. One thing that's different than what was published in the packet on Friday is the debt service number. I was a little too optimistic on the debt service, and I had that flat for 2022, but actually more accurate projection is that's going to be 400,000 higher. And so as you can see, what assessing is looking at for the assessed values in January of 21, which the 2022 tax levy will be based on, with the increase that is expected with the residential values and decreases in commercial, even if we have a tax levy decrease of 1.48% in 2022, the median value home could see a 7% increase. So that's something we want to share with you, and we've talked about that a little bit before about what's going to happen in 2022 that we can start talking about now. So these are all before any budget reductions, and this is these next three slides. It's just very similar to what I just showed you, but it's going to have what it looks like when we take one of the scenarios from the committee that was presented. So I just took scenario A, which was a 5% tax levy. And the only thing that's changed on this sheet is in the column, the 2021 budget. And if you compare the two, where there's reductions, where the scenario A had reductions that are affecting the general fund. And so you'll see the reductions there. And then you'll also see some reductions. Here's that slide that shows all of the property tax levy. And you can see it's not just a reduction in the general fund. With what the committee proposed in the 5%, the scenario A budget scenario, that motor vehicle would be closed, and so that there wouldn't be a tax levy, an amount of the tax levy that's allocated to motor vehicle. There would be some changes in communications that would come down 75,000. There would be some additional things for aquatics. So you can see that where I took all of the budget reductions that were suggested and worked it through the model. And so it gets us, it's not exactly 5%, but it's a little bit under 5%. And then how that carries through, some of the budget reduction ideas that are presented are just for 21, and some are more permanent and would carry on to 2022. So I worked that through 2022 as well. And this is what that projection looks like. So it's it's closer to 0 for 2022 for a tax levy change. But again, because of the changes we're looking at, what assessing is saying for the residential, it's an 8% increase. And then these next slides here, this is a review. This is a slide from when co-chairs Steve Peterson and Neil Peterson presented the final report from the committee, and these are the 3 scenarios. And just to show you that the scenario A was a 5% tax levy increase, B was a 3% tax levy increase, and C was 0%, so no tax levy increase. And they build on each other. So the items that are suggested for budget reductions that are in A would also be in B, and then A and B would be in C. And this splits out the amounts between the different departments. And as you can see at the bottom, how they add up is it's 1.6 million in scenario A, and then you add an additional 1.3 million if it's scenario B, so that's 2.9 million in reductions. And then scenario C with 0% tax levy increase is 4.8 million. And then these are in your packets as well, but this is that list, and it is prioritized how the committee prioritized it. So meaning that the one at the very top is the one that they would recommend cutting first, and then it just goes down from there. And so when it hit the amounts at the time when we were trying to hit the 5% tax levy and the 3% and 0, that's where you'll see lines where it goes from scenario A to scenario B, and there's some that are kind of right on the cusp. But that's how it's laid out. And then there were some items that they looked at that they didn't want to include for different reasons at all, but they're still on the list for you to see. So that was what I had just to kind of go over and review and highlight some things. Are there any questions about that, or I can turn it over to City Manager to talk about the tax?
Council, questions specific to Kari's presentation as opposed to the overall discussion that we're going to be having here shortly. Any questions specific to the presentation? I am seeing none. Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Kari, can you go back a couple slides to where scenario A and scenario B are separated? One of the, there you go. One of the things I want to point out and emphasize of what Kari said is you'll see where that dividing line is, and option number 79 is above the line option number 80 and 81, which was the same ranking according to the committee. Why is that part of scenario B? If you look over at the right side on that cumulative amount, what the committee tried to do was to sort the options based on the dollar target to get to that level of reduction. So that 1.5 roughly matches the reduction necessary to get to the 5%, as does down the road when you get to 2.9 matching the 3%. So if somebody's looking at this and saying, why is something that's ranked the same above the line or below the line? It's because of the number that the committee was trying to achieve in getting to their targets. If you could go forward 2 slides, please, Kari. So I just want to share with the council where we're at on the tax levy. As budget manager said, council set a preliminary levy at 5%. We cannot go above that number for the coming year, pay 21. It's based on the median value home of 286 is what we use to demonstrate. That's less than a 1% valuation increase from the year before, because we had a stable valuation year in our residential assessment. And if you go down the left column, what you see are the different taxing jurisdictions. So the city, the county, the school district, and that other line item is for taxing jurisdictions such as the Metropolitan Council, Three Rivers Parks District, Mosquito Control District, a number, they're smaller districts that are all bundled together. This is trying to approximate what somebody who has a home that is that median value would see on their truth and taxation statement, which just started hitting mailboxes over the weekend. So at a 5% levy, this for the city, you can see where it is $3.41 for the median value home and as a monthly change. Now, the property tax statement is not just for the city, it's for all the taxing jurisdictions. So you see that the county had a 0% levy. School district had a 2.8% preliminary levy. So the county will be going down about $6 a month. The school district is slightly up, a little over $1 a month. The other jurisdictions are down. So if you get to that line where it says total with city at 5%, the median value home will be paying less in 2021 than they did in 2020 by about who are not homeowners but are renters. And so for many renters, that property tax that's levied on the apartment property, the owner or the manager of that property often just passes through those property taxes in the form of rent to tenants. So we're trying to be mindful there. The difference between the median value home and the median value apartment is if you go up to the top where it says versus prior year, it's the valuation change in those two property classifications. Where the median value home was stable going from 20 to 21, the median value apartment increased pretty substantially in value by about 7%. So if you go back down to the bottom again, the total with city at 5 or with at 3 or at 0 are the three different levy numbers that the CBAC, the Community Budget Advisory Committee, was considering. And so you can see that in any of the three scenarios, based on all taxing jurisdictions, the median value home will experience a reduction in property taxes for 2020. All right. All right, and then on this chart, I just wanted to, first of all, thank our assessing shop. They put together great information for us, our city assessor and his team. And what you see on the bar chart is just the visualization of how many homeowners are in the different segmented impact areas for property taxes. So the blue bars are single family residential, the orange is the commercial industrial taxpayer, and the gray is the apartment. What you see in this bar chart is that about 56% of single family residential property taxpayers will actually be paying less in 2021 than they did in 2020. And then you can see that there's about 30% of homeowners that would have somewhere between a 0 to a 5% increase, a relatively modest increase. And then obviously, as you get into the higher increase, that number gets smaller. You'll see that the commercial and industrial values largely were stable, which is reflected in the concentration of CI properties being either just above or just below 0%. And again, the impact going into 2021 is to apartment properties as they had the strongest valuation growth for the year. So what we can't do when we show the median value home figure is to give every single resident an idea of what it means for their property taxes, because every single property is different. It's valued at a different amount. It changes value at a different percentage. So it's not possible for us to say to any individual taxpayer here, this is what's going to happen. So we use the median value home as the best way to approximate the impact. But what this bar chart effectively does is show that the majority of residents will see a reduction in their property taxes in 2021 on their truth in taxation statement. With that, Mr. Mayor and council members, I will pause and turn it back if you have any questions on this information, or if you want to jump into the discussion, happy to answer questions as we go. Thank you.
Let's start with the questions specific to the presentation that we just heard, what Mr. Verbrugge just said, and then we'll get into our bigger discussion here in just a moment. Councilmember Lohman.
So just briefly, and I'm suspecting you won't have an answer for this, Mr. Manager. When we look at that 2022, that median value home, you showed us what was for the 2021 information. Any speculation in terms of what that would look like if we had the 5, the 3, and the 0 chart at all?
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, we haven't done the 2022 at any different tax levy options at this point. We can certainly plug that in and bring that information back, and most likely will when we have a better sense of where we're going to land this year. As our budget manager said, even from Friday when the packet went out to Monday, we have some changes. And so this late in the year, as we're getting final numbers, getting closer to resolution, we're feeling better and more confident about the specific numbers. When we come back November 30th, Councilmember Lohman, we can show you what a couple of those forecasts look like.
That'd be excellent.
Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is not something I know you'll have on at the tip of your fingers now, but would it be possible that chart showing how many households see certain percentage, that one, would it be possible to get that for previous years? Because I think that kind of information would be really helpful to kind of, as I'm talking to folks, to sort of be able to compare things in terms of the changes that we see in levies and that kind of thing.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Coulter, did you say you wanted to get it for what purpose?
For previous, I think it'd just be helpful for information for me to know, so that
okay.
when folks ask questions about how is this year different and that kind of thing.
You bet.
Council, additional specific questions on the presentation, the information ahead of us here? Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. So I am curious, for the people who are watching at home who don't have this information or maybe haven't heard this information, can you talk about why the city is having to consider such larger levy increases than compared to the school district and the county?
Sure.
I think it's helpful information for people who are watching.
I would agree, Councilmember Carter. Mr. Verbrugge, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Councilmember Carter and Kari Carlson referred to this during her presentation as well. Kari, will you go back one slide? So what Councilmember Carter is asking is, why is it that the county can do a preliminary levy of 0%, the school district can do 2.8%, and meanwhile the city has started with a 5% preliminary levy. The reason is that the three taxing jurisdictions have a very different set of revenues. The city of Bloomington has about 13% of its revenues pre-pandemic that came via lodging taxes and admissions taxes. Those are revenues that are generated by business activity at the what was then 47 hotels, currently 46 hotels in the city of Bloomington, as well as entertainment venues at Mall of America and other locations. So when the pandemic caused those businesses to shut down and dramatically curtailed the number of people who were either staying in those properties or visiting those properties, the city has a declining revenue as a result. Going into 2021, we are not anticipating that those revenues are going to recover. The revenues that are tied to the lodging industry and the retail and entertainment and hospitality industries are directly related to the economy as it's affected by the pandemic. So our financial modeling team has been every week meeting to track what's going on around the country and in our own state, and even in our own city as it pertains to foot traffic and visitors and sales and economic activity, to try and forecast what those revenues may be. We are using a slow recovery model right now. We had three models at the beginning of the pandemic that were regularly adjusted based on the data. And because of where we're at in the current stage of the pandemic, the expectation for when a vaccine may be commercially available and accessible for the vast majority of the population, and when life can sort of begin to return to something resembling normal. We have identified that as a long recovery for the purpose of our revenues. Now, the county does not have those kinds of revenues is a significant contributor to its budget. And the reductions that the county made, as I understand it, to get to their preliminary levy and in their budgeting was significantly reducing capital expenditures. With the school district, they have a heavily prescribed revenue system by state law. And so there are very few outside influencers that aren't controlled by the state in some manner, unless it is the variability in the per pupil, the numbers of pupil, because it's largely a per pupil formula. So that, I think, is the biggest difference between the taxing jurisdictions, is that we've got 13% of our budget, the revenues in our budget that are more volatile because of the larger pandemic economy than the other jurisdictions. Councilmember Carter, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to follow up with that question and see if the city manager can also talk to the expenditure or cost side of things. Obviously, we're taking a hit on the revenue side, but I just think it's important for people to understand that at all of these levies, even though it talks about an increase, actual city spending is going down. And can you talk a little bit to that point?
Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Nelson. Kari, if you would go back to the long-term model before the budget reductions. This is the sheet that has really small numbers on it, so I apologize to everybody right away. If you're watching on a device and you go over to the left, you should be able to zoom in on this a little bit. Before we even considered the reductions that were being suggested and ranked by the Community Budget Advisory Committee, the city staff in preparing their departmental budgets already made a significant number of decisions to get to a starting point. So if you look in the expenses portion of that, Kari, can you use your cursor to sort of just circle around that area? Yeah. So what you see from the 2020 budget, that column, to the 2021 budget, is that most of those line items, which are the departments, city council, administration, legal, finance, police, finance, fire, community development, with the exception of police and public works and city council, it's a minor increase, but for the police and public works are the only two departments where you see an increase, although you will note in community services, there's an increase that's related to public health funding. So it's a little bit of an outlier, but for the day-to-day operations, we have already reduced the department line budgets before we got to the Budget Advisory Committee review.
Councilmember Nelson, anything else?
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's just important for people to understand that the discussion we'll probably have going forward is about how far, how deep to cut expenditures, that there has not been a conversation about raising our expenditures at the city level. We started kind of at zero and are working down from there, recognizing the current situation that people and businesses in our community are in.
Council, anything additional? Any additional questions? So our ultimate task tonight is for us to give staff direction. We want to point them to the 2021 final tax levy. We want to offer them our ideas about the preferences regarding the Community Budget Advisory Committee recommended options, and to ask any additional questions if we need more information more details, anything for further discussion that would take place at the November 30th meeting of the City Council. And we have a lot of information here and a lot to go through, and there's a lot of things to think about, especially with the 3 budget options. So I wanted to try and put a little framework around it, try and get our discussion started, again, with some framework, with some kind of directed questions, so we can try and start to sort through all this from each of our perspectives and to figure out where we're going, with the ultimate goal to get to the goals that I just talked about, the things that I just talked about. We've got to give staff direction on the 2021 final levy and talk about potential budget cuts to get there. So I just want to start the conversation, to throw it out and see where it takes us. I want to know what stands out, Council. What stands out to you when you look at the Community Budget Advisory Commission scenarios? What stands out? What jumps off the page at you when you look at those different scenarios that the CBAC brought forward? Councilmember Nelson and then Councilmember Martin. Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll jump in there. I, first of all, just want to thank the committee and the staff for the amount of work that they did to provide these scenarios and the thoughts and the ranking and everything like that. I think it's been well done. They did what we asked. I will be honest that in my mind, it's kind of a struggle in terms of, do we stick with what the recommendations are? How much do we tweak those? We asked them to do something. They did it. They did good work. They spent a lot of time on that versus kind of jumping into and trying to modify it after the fact or redo it, which is one of my concerns of just totally redoing what they've done. But I think they've given us a good guideline. My sense is we'll probably make a determination of where to fall and then maybe make some tweaks and modifications. I know we already potentially have one budget item that has changed due to the ballot initiative, although I think we'll be talking about a recount about that later. But so that's kind of where I'm at now. I think the information, the diligence has been really good.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And yeah, I'll echo Councilmember Nelson's appreciation for the committee's work, but also I want to give a huge shout out to staff in particular, not only to be trying to crunch the numbers on what the budget trajectory for the city would look like in a crisis like this regardless, but then to kind of also be facilitating and leading this whole new approach to the budget process at the same time is pretty cool. At kind of the 10,000 foot level, I'm sure we'll get into nitty gritty a little bit later on. I acknowledge and I'm excited to see that the majority of homeowners in the community are going to see an overall decrease. But after, I guess, in my time on council, it seems like the recurring theme has really been housing affordability. And to see that there are still substantial increases for our renters in the community is still kind of troubling. So I would be looking to, just personally, I'm looking more at the scenario B range right now. And again, not to get too nitty gritty, but Bloomington was poised to lead the metro area in envisioning and defining and moving on what a 21st century suburb could look like before this all hit. And though it's kind of hard to picture it now, we will be in that position again when this is all behind us. So I don't want to cut off our legs to save on the cost of shoes. So on individual items like a community development director, a few other things, I would be hesitant to get rid of that now and hamstring ourselves later. But to try and control costs as much as we can for a lot of Bloomington families that are struggling more now today than they have in quite a while, I'm going to be shooting for kind of the middle of this scale.
Others? I'll be happy to share what stands out for me and appreciate, again, the work that the CBAC did and the information that they did bring forward. What definitely stands out as you look at the different scenarios, the 0.35% increase, just how real these cuts get when you look at the different, all of the levels. Even at the 5% tax increase, which would be the highest increase that we could go, there are significant cuts to Bloomington services that will affect Bloomington residents in one way or another, and will affect Bloomington city staff. And as you work your way down to a 3% increase and even a 0% increase, the impacts become deeper, they become more acute, they become more obvious, and they will affect more people more directly in many more ways. And it's we all knew that. I think we all knew that. We understood that as we got into this, and as we've talked about this all along. In fact, we understood this as we even went back to about this time last year when we heard from a number of residents about their concerns about their property tax increases, which were largely due to valuation shifts and the increases in the valuations of their homes. But we knew full well that to reduce would mean impact, and significant impact on what makes Bloomington a good place to live, whether it's our city staff, the services they provide, the work that we put into the parks, the streets, the sidewalks, all of those different pieces to affect a budget cut that would that may be necessary here is going to impact a large number of people, a significant number of people in a lot of different ways. So that's what stood out most to me from the scenario. Something that I think we knew all along, but to see it on paper like this, I think, is a pretty jarring look. Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I just to sort of get to the specifics, to echo Councilmember Martin, the community development director position, I would go so far as to say that is a deal breaker for me. I think with everything we have going on with the city, with redevelopment and the need clearly that I think folks in the community see for revitalization of our commercial nodes and that sort of thing, that's just an example of something that I think we need to still do. I would also just say that and this is something that I asked the co-chairs about at the previous meeting. The things on this list that were sort of there are a few that are sort of money savers, for lack of a better phrase, that were just sort of being put off for years in the future. I think now is the time for a lot of those things. But to sort of get back to sort of a 10,000 foot level, I've said already in just my 3 years on the council, more times than I can count, that budget decisions are policy decisions. And I don't know about the rest of you, but the phone calls and the emails that I've gotten from residents over the last few weeks, even frankly in the last few days, have really borne that out. To Mayor, to echo the point that you just made, we are seeing right before our very eyes right now that the budget and levy discussions the decisions that we make don't exist in a vacuum, that they have very real, tangible effects for a lot of people, both, to be clear, both in terms of what we pay, but also what we pay for. And before I get too far, I do also want to thank the Budget Advisory Committee and staff for being able to take the time and the care to have the discussions and do the homework. And I think more importantly, making it all accessible to folks. I can't tell you how refreshing it's been to be able to direct folks to the website and say, these are the things we're thinking about. These are the things we've already done. So I hope we can continue that kind of accessibility and transparency moving forward. And so what I would say is that with where we are tonight, I guess in some sense, it's kind of what I've been saying all along. I think we are absolutely right to think about the impact that property taxes are going to have on folks. It's very real, and it shouldn't be dismissed. But it's not just a simple question of pay more or less. And I to be clear, I'm also not generally fond from a policy perspective. I'm not generally fond of forcing people to innovate through sort of arbitrary cuts. But I think if that's the way forward, that should be an expectation of everyone, not just a few departments. So, I'm not naive enough to think that there is some sort of magic combination that's going to satisfy everyone. Almost everything that's going to be cut is important to someone, and just about everyone would be able to point to something else that they prefer. But I think, from what we've heard, from what we've all heard, we've gotten a pretty good idea of where Bloomington's priorities are. And I guess I would just say that, when the rubber meets the road, if we say we value something, then the way to prove it is by making sure that the resources are there for it to continue and to succeed. And, it's, as we've already talked about tonight, as we keep an eye on the future, the decisions are going to be orders of magnitude more challenging next year. And I think we're all of us just going to have to think really long and hard about the value that we place on the things we do through city government, and what Bloomington would be like if we didn't do them anymore, and what the costs of both options would be. And I think what it comes down to for me is that, yes, we should prioritize those sort of basic core services that local government must provide. But we also can't neglect the things that only local government will provide. We know that there are things that the city does that nobody else is going to do. And many of those are those sort of quality of life things that are going to be even more important now and into the future, or what will determine a large measure of our success and ability to thrive as a community. So I guess my sort of take on it is not necessarily a specific number, at least not at the moment. But I would hate for us to be penny wise and pound foolish, and potentially harm our long-term goals for the sake of what I would say are more short-term consequences or concerns. Concerns.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for everybody's information, I've stopped my video because I was getting too much garbling of the other council members' comments when they spoke. So that's helped and cleared up that issue. So I will be running without video for the rest of this meeting. Again, I don't want to repeat all that's been said, but I think things are changed, and it's said that already, between even the time that the Community Budget Advisory sat together and as we sit here today. So I'm going to get down to, rather than a number of issues that I think are important for us to address. And those are three in particular. And one is motor vehicle funding. The second is Creekside funding. And lastly, it's a combination of funding our Public Safety Department, which is Bloomington Police and Bloomington Fire. Councilmember Coulter mentioned that there are things that we value, and on May 18th of this year, what we did is we looked at a proposal to close motor vehicle and Creekside, and we rejected that proposal. To a great extent in most of the scenarios, the closing of Creekside and closing of motor vehicles is forecasted, and I find that problematic. I think those are decisions that we made and spoke to in May, virtually less than 6 months ago. And we thought that the problems that we would have in 2021 were more dire than what they're proving to be. It's severe, but far less severe than what we expected. So I advocate continuing those two programs in their entirety. With respect to public safety, whether it's factual or not, I believe the reality of our residents is that they feel less safe today less safe today in Bloomington than they did a year ago. And as a result, I don't find that I can accept any reductions to public safety in this. So those are some big numbers, but I want to talk more program than numbers. We already know that there is some cost reduction that hasn't been addressed by the committee. And also, we have 2021 for Highland Creek funded. And while we're cutting out services for a number of people, we're going to continue to fund 2 golf courses. I think that I find that problematic and cannot support that. And to fund the remainder of what I'm proposing, I am proposing that we rededicate franchise fees that go aside, into a reserve fund for a couple features. They go in there for a pavement management program, and they go in for trail reconstruction. And just like Hennepin County achieved their budget by reducing some capital items, I would say that because of the COVID and budget crisis, that we dedicate those portion of franchise fees that go for trail reconstruction in 2021 to the general fund and have that offset motor vehicle, Creekside, and the public safety items that I've discussed. Now, overall, I'm looking, as Councilmember Martin said, somewhere in between, the 2.5% kind of budget scenario. And I think with what I propose that we can achieve that nicely. So having said that, I will give the floor back to you, Mr. Mayor, and hear comments from other council members.
Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you. I think one of the thank you, Mayor, for your question that you asked, and I think that when I look at these particular items, what comes to mind is what I think one of the co-chairs said during our last meeting, which was, whatever you do, what can you explain to the taxpayer or to the residents in Bloomington? And so I kind of look at this in that particular fashion. So first off, I've looked at this in terms of a 2-year view. I think it's important that we look at whatever we do from a 2-year point of view. Nothing new. I've always said that every year that I've come to this budget, and I think that's an important principle that we continue to look at. Next is core services. And I look at those core services are important to protect those in terms of fire, police, and I also place our health services as a part of that core service. Certainly we're seeing that this year. And then number 3 would be duplicative services. So for example, golf. We've got 2 different golf courses and we've got other duplicative services out there. And so I'm looking at those to see what makes sense kind of moving forward. And B, I'm looking at our 7 council priorities. I noticed that in some of the cuts that were proposed, they cut in to those 7 budgetary priorities. And then finally, I look at programs that if we were to cut those programs, we would not be able to bring those program services or offerings back to Bloomington. I think it's poor policy, in my opinion, to try to cut things during a downturn when you cannot really guarantee that you're going to be able to move those forward. And I'm not going to repeat what Councilmember Beloga said, but I think those items that he's mentioned really is there and really where it needs to be. So those are the 5 kind of areas there. Permanent program closures that can't be brought back, 7 council priorities, duplicative services, the core services that we have in the 2-year view. One final remark that I want to make, which I think is unfortunate, is that I remember that our staff had said, I don't know if it was last year or a couple of years ago, one of the things that they thought that we ought to do is really be focused in on this 13%, this lodging and admissions fee, because there may be some problems with this kind of going forward, and we should maybe look at setting up a rainy day fund. And I want to just, I don't know who that was on staff who brought that up. I want to just acknowledge that we missed that. It came up and we didn't talk about it. We didn't bite on it as a council. And that is, I think, an opportunity kind of going forward where we can really listen to what staff is kind of saying. Certainly want to thank our budget committee that we started and for the great work that they have done. I was hoping to see a little bit more in regards to the stuff that we saw tonight. And I've seen some great stuff in the past. I was just looking at our 2020 budget notebook. It's a big, huge packet. And I know that we'll be able to get more information to be able to kind of move these priorities forward. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation about where we fall between the 5 and the 0% as we move forward. But those 5 principles are what I'm going to be looking at kind of moving forward.
Council, anyone else want to weigh in on the question of what stands out for you? Councilmember Carter?
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I will just get straight to the point. I am personally landing somewhere in the middle of the levy options that we have. Not super comfortable with the 5%, but I'm also really not comfortable at 0% for many of the reasons that my colleagues on council here already brought up. I think that we've talked so much about being a community of choice, and I think we have to acknowledge that still needs to be a priority for us. And if we want to be a community of choice, it cannot just be about basic city services. We have to make sure that we are still prioritizing our parks and rec, our natural resources, sustainability, arts, making sure that we are, we've started so many initiatives around, development of our neighborhood corridors. I think, eliminating the position, the leadership position in our community development department that is tasked with strategy and relationship building, and it's a big role. And I feel like it would be a really big mistake for us to eliminate that position, even if it's, a temporary over a year or two. I also have concerns about, I don't know what the full Sustainability Commission budget is, but with climate change being one of the most pressing issues facing us today, I think it makes me feel really uncomfortable to eliminate what I would assume is a substantial part of their budget. So I would be interested in knowing how much of that it is. When I was reading through the paperwork, it sounded like there was concern that would impact our goals of CO2 emissions. And so, again, I'm not super on board with eliminating that budget if there's going to be significant impacts there. I feel like over and over again throughout the years, I've seen climate change and sustainability be treated as something that's a nice to do, but it's absolutely crucial and should be one of our top priorities. And so one question I did have related to the slides. So I know for lower income homeowners who are having trouble making their property tax payments, I know that there's a state program that they can apply for. And I'm curious for, multifamily housing owners, if, is there any kind of program being made available to them that could help offset some of the increased costs and kind of mitigate some of the impact to renters? I know, if I recall, there was a program being established to help provide some support for the multi-family unit property owners, given that they're also experiencing some financial hardship. And so I don't know if anybody has an answer to that, among staff, but I would be interested in knowing that. I mean, I definitely am encouraged by the fact that at least for 2021, that homeowners won't experience, or the majority of homeowners won't experience a significant property tax increase. But, you know, I do worry about the impact on the 40% of renters in our community. So I guess at a high level, that is what I'm thinking. And I'm happy to kind of go into more details too, but I will stop there for now.
Ms. Carlson, do you have anything off the top of your head regarding what Councilmember Carter brought up?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Carter, the property tax refund program that is through the state is applicable for both homeowners and renters. So that is something that is available to both. And it's based on, for renters, it's based on rent and income.
Great, thank you. I thought I recalled that from when I was a renter, but I could not quite remember how it worked. So thank you. I guess one other comment that I would like to make in response to Councilmember Beloga's comment about Creekside and motor vehicle. If I recall back to those conversations, at least where I was at 6 months ago, and like Councilmember Beloga said, it was, you know, we've learned a lot. We know a little bit more about our situation now and the impacts. And if I recall correctly, it was that there were council members were uncomfortable making those significant budget decisions in a vacuum without having the bigger picture like we have now. And so I will say, as hard as it is, as difficult as it is, because I know that there are real impacts. I would entertain the idea of closing motor vehicle. I would consider that. But I would not be supportive of completely closing Creekside. I definitely am willing to compromise in terms of like what the partial kind of opening or reopening of it looks like when it's safe for our seniors. So I would not be comfortable with the full shutdown, but I also am kind of I'm comfortable meeting halfway there. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. And I agree. That's how I remember that conversation back in May as well regarding motor vehicle, that it was a concern about trying to make the decision without all of the options and all the possibilities out in front of us. And so I agree that was the conversation that we had. So a couple of folks have brought them up. Actually, a number of the comments I've heard have gone to our strategic initiatives. And so I'd like to hear more about that. Talk more about how your thoughts regarding the budget, how these budget options, these budget proposals, how they land regarding not only the council's strategic initiatives, which we've laid out, and admittedly, Councilmember Martin, I know we're behind our calendar in trying to get those updated and taking a second look at those. But how do the budget scenarios reflect the council's strategic initiatives? And for that matter, how do those budget scenarios reflect community preferences, what you've heard from members of the community, what you believe are the important parts of this community that make this community what it is? Be interested to hear more, because our strategic priorities of community image, equity and inclusion, community amenities, high quality services, focused renewal, environmental sustainability, and engagement and transparency. Those are our stated council strategic priorities. And so in your minds, how does this all kind of work together? How does it fit into those priorities? How do the budget options fit into those priorities? Any thoughts on that? I mean, I will chime in with the two that jump out to me are environmental sustainability and equity and inclusion. And from a resources standpoint, I think we've had discussions over the past year and acknowledged pretty frankly and straightforward that those two strategic priorities are under-resourced right now. If we want to accomplish the things that we have laid out, and many of the plans that have been put together by both our Sustainability Commission and laid out by our Racial Equity Coordinator, those areas are under-resourced right now. So how does that play toward the budget scenarios that we have. If that's the case, if we want to prioritize those strategic initiatives that we have talked about, again, more than one occasion over the past year, what does that look like in terms of the other budget options and the other budget scenarios that are out there? Come on now, you can't all be quiet at once. Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think, you hit the nail on the head there, that the conversations that we've had, particularly conversations that we've had, I would say over since January 1st of this year, really reflect what you said, that we have not, I think, in terms of equity and inclusion and environmental sustainability, really allocated the resources that are necessary to accomplish the things that we said we want to accomplish. And I mean, at the risk of once again quoting myself, budget decisions are policy decisions. And I would add to that that I think focused renewal is, I wouldn't say it's something that's been under-resourced, but I think we need to be realistic about the resources that will be required moving forward. And I think of this both in terms of economic development and redevelopment, but also in terms of our city amenities. I mean, we are going through a parks master planning process right now. And I mean, I think it's safe to say that when it comes to city provided facilities and amenities, parks are what we hear about. It's what we hear about from our neighbors. And so, I think making sure that we have the resources to do what we really need to do. And the reality is that, when it comes to city amenities, if we want to talk about focused renewal, I think the conversation starts at parks as well. So, I think we just need to be clear about what the future is, what the future that we are looking to create in Bloomington looks like, and what kind of future we want. And when we think about the things that attract folks to move to a place and keep folks there, it's those kinds of things. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulter. Councilmember Martin and Councilmember Carter, are you up next, or is that an old hand? If I could remind you all just to bring your hand down when you're done with your comment, just so I can keep track of everybody who wants to speak here. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I guess this might be more of a process question, but I'm seeing, so say we were to discuss seriously kind of moving forward with scenario B, but there's items in here where it might make sense to do a partial reduction. I guess one example to pull out here, let's see here, or not a partial reduction, I should say, maybe holding on to it. I guess from the equity angle, I come to partially eliminating our winter trail plowing. I took a look at our overall alternative transportation plan today, our bus network across the city, and saw that if we were to scale that back, there's a lot of residential sidewalks that lead some of the biggest bus stops, especially over in District 4 on the east side of town, which I could see as being a pretty huge equity issue, as folks that a lot of times tend to be lower income, maybe are working in our hospitality industry and are relying on those transit networks in order to get where they need to go. So as we're discussing the scenarios moving forward, I don't want to make everything too crazy, but can this be a thing where we take the bulk of one scenario, but maybe hold one item out and include an item from, say, scenario C? I don't want to make a Frankenstein, but I think that would be helpful around the priorities conversation.
I think, Councilmember Martin, this can be what we want it to be and how we want it to be. I agree with Councilmember Nelson's original comments that the Community Budget Advisory Committee put a lot of work into this and a lot of thought and a lot of very good discussion, but that doesn't mean, as was discussed earlier, that option 79 is sacrosanct and option 80, where the line is drawn, can't be moved at all. I do think we could, I think, in good conscience and probably with the understanding of the Community Budget Advisory Committee, if we moved puzzle pieces around a bit, and I wouldn't, I don't know that I would be entirely comfortable moving something to an enormous degree, but I do think it would be acceptable from my perspective, and then probably from the advisory committee's perspective. And frankly, I guess it's up to the council whether or not it would be acceptable to them, whether to move things significantly within the list of prioritization. So I do think that's something that we can certainly talk about. Council, any more thoughts on the strategic initiatives and community preferences discussion, where all of this lands? Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. In terms of our strategic priorities, I think that Councilmember Beloga in emphasizing our core services, our police, fire, public works is spot on there. I think reasonably the community expects us to continue to provide those services at a high level, and we should fund them. There might be one small tweak that I'd make on the police budget, that there is a potential to fund some overtime using a forfeiture account for at least a year, maybe two. That one I might, as long as we're continuing to fund it, have some flexibility on. But I think those core basic services are what our community expects us to do, and we need to protect those. In terms of community amenities, when we look at things like Creekside, Highland Golf Course, even the motor vehicle, personally, I think if we're going to change anything with regards to those should potentially be individual conversations, not done through a budget process to cut them, that we should let the community know what we're doing, have hearings, get more feedback on that, because those are extremely impactful for people. And, I think that it's important to really be robust in our process about making those types of big decisions, in particular with regards to our amenities there. So I think that's kind of a couple of the thoughts that I had related to our priorities.
Thank you, Councilmember Nelson. Any other questions or thoughts on this one? Councilmember Lohman?
I don't think I need to restate what I said about the 7 budgetary priorities. Certainly, I did see some things in there that specifically I wouldn't cut if they fit underneath those 7 priorities. And Councilmember Carter mentioned one of them. Certainly since I sit on that commission, I want to be careful about mentioning that, but I do think there's some things we got to be careful about. But the way in which I look at some of those, and I think Councilmember Nelson's really kind of put it out correctly. When we look at some of these other larger things, Highland Greens, motor vehicle, I think that's the way to kind of move forward with that. When I look at some of these things, there are equity issues, there are sustainable issues they're all part of those major entities that we have there. And certainly when I look specifically at motor vehicle, in order for folks to get jobs in this community, living, if we are indeed a suburban area, getting a driver's license is top on that list. I don't know how that can't be an equity issue. So, but that's all I'll comment, Mayor. Thanks.
Councilmember Carter?
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I did want to make another comment about a specific line item that is, related to our strategic priorities, and I think can kind of it can cut across a couple of them. But if we were to go a scenario B, that would be 2/3 of the cultural arts grants that have a reduction in funding. It's a 2/3 of reduction in funding. And I think if we're going to be talking about having more robust conversations about motor vehicle and Creekside and some of these bigger amenities, I think we need to have a more robust conversation around the arts. We have a huge arts center at Civic Plaza, and if we are, taking away resources that help keep these arts organizations afloat, and Civic Plaza and arts, our civic plaza is a community center. It is where people gather. It is where, people spend time together. It's where people come together in community. And so I guess I would just say that if we're going to have more robust conversations around individual light items that are significant amenities in our community, I've heard from plenty of people around the arts organizations. And so I would propose that we add that to the list.
Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just briefly want to echo what Councilmember Carter said about the cultural arts grants. I personally know the value and what our community gets from arts organizations, and I think what we see is that these are sort of, for lack of a better term, grassroots arts organizations. These are organizations in which a great many of the folks who participate live right here in Bloomington, and certainly a lot of the folks who receive the benefit of these organizations live right here in Bloomington as well. Just to a couple of specific things that I just forgot to mention last time I spoke. While I don't necessarily agree with the specific priorities that he laid out, I think Councilmember Beloga is exactly right that we should think about being creative with the revenues we have from franchise fees. I think my recollection is that this was a sort of a policy decision that was made, I think a number of years, even before I was on the council, to dedicate franchise fees as they are. And I think you all know how I feel about continuing to do things just because that's the way we've always done it. So I want to urge folks to think about that creatively. As far as specific things that have been discussed, and I think it is fair to return to the conversation about Creekside motor vehicles. My position on Creekside, to be quite frank, has not changed. I mean, this is, of course, a budget decision and a policy decision. And until there is a more permanent solution, and unless, relocating everything to Civic Plaza becomes that permanent solution, in which case we'd obviously need to know more about it. But unless and until there's a more permanent solution as far as what comes next, once we close Creekside, I can't support that. I think that's just not a good policy decision. As far as Highland Greens, I think at some point we may just need to rip the Band-Aid off and talk about what the future is of Highland Greens. From what we have heard, it doesn't sound like things are really moving forward with PGA Reach. I don't want to characterize anything more than I know, but we can't just keep that in stasis. I think at some point we're going to have to make a decision about the future of Highland Greens. And as far as motor vehicles, I have thought a lot about this, and I get that it is a great convenience. And I think Councilmember Woman's not wrong to say that there is, to a certain extent, an equity issue here. I think the location at Southdale is not ideal for folks who live in Bloomington, but it is accessible by transit. There are options available, and there may even, as we have discussed, there may even be options potentially for some kind of deputy registrar office within the city of Bloomington. There are, of course, permissions that would need to come before that and so on. But I think what it comes down to for me is that motor vehicles is a great convenience for the community. And I've certainly availed myself of that convenience, but it is not one of those things that city government has to do. And it's clear that it's not one of those things that somebody else won't do if we don't. So while it would obviously not be my preference, I would be, my position, I would say on motor vehicles is likewise not changed. That I think it is, I think we would be well enough without it if we had to close it. So I just, I think that's where I come down on those particular things, as long as we're on the topic.
Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the heart of any community is arts and cultural activities. And I think for us not to fully fund those is a mistake. In particular, when you look at the amount of money that we're talking about, it's really de minimis in the scope of things. So I would advocate for that. And sustainability is an imperative. So we need to continue to press forward with that. Having said that, which are new comments for me, added to what I had previously said, since everybody has had the opportunity to speak at least once, I would like to hear what the comments are from the city manager in response to what he's heard so far.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Bloga, if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and respond.
If I could just jump in, I appreciate it. Just let me jump in because I have one thing specific to a couple of comments that were made specifically about franchise fees. Those who have been around a while know that I have never supported franchise fees. I voted against franchise fees every time they have come up, with the thought being that if we're going to actually take money from folks, we should tax them. The franchise fee, it's like the cigarette or the tobacco fee from the 90s here in the state of Minnesota, which was it was ridiculous. It was a tax. And so I agree that if we're going to look at different revenue streams, I will not at all be supportive of changing where franchise fees go to. Right now they go specifically to park trails and trails and trail maintenance. And I know that's been one of the top priorities when we're talking about community amenities. That's been one of the top priorities that residents have placed over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years in terms of what they want to see in the community. And I think there have been at least a couple of council members who have been very outspoken in the need for additional funding for that and for the need to continue that. So with that in mind, I mean, I would not support moving franchise fees around just to get them into the general fund and use them to be on a general purpose. And I'm ultimately maybe on the losing end of that, but that would never be my goal for franchise fees. So with that said, Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. To Councilmember Beloga's question, what I'm generally hearing from the council members is an approach that I think we all share. As I'm factoring the items that are being discussed and how it affects the community, I think I have 2 objectives here. One is to really minimize the impact of service reductions on the community to the extent that we can not have those be seen or felt by the community to the greatest extent possible. And at the same time that we are protecting the taxpayers to the greatest extent possible from any sort of a tax impact that may adversely affect them, especially in a time that's certainly trying. So the discussion here is pretty consistent with the discussion at the Budget Advisory Committee, which is that public safety and public works, those core services of government, should be very, very carefully considered, and that other items, as I believe it was Councilmember Coulter may have said, it seems like these are things that have been talked about for a while. They're just decisions, management decisions to back away from things. There are opportunities to do that, and those should be the priorities. So I think the council and the committee and the staff are all in alignment in those areas. And so the real challenge, I think, is how do we meet those dual objectives of minimizing the impact of service reductions and minimizing the impact of tax increases, because it's hard to do both. What I don't want to move towards the end of the conversation, but just to give the council and the community a sense of how I'm going to try to bring in the city manager's budget recommendation to the council, is to look at a way that accomplishes both of those things for 2021 but also has an eye to the future. As Kari shared in her presentation, as we look to 2022, we know that there's going to be a potential impact to the taxpayer again because of the tax shift that is going to occur because of how the valuations move around. And at this time, it's really hard for us to forecast what the economic conditions may be within the community a year from now, who may be impacted even more so, whether the malaise that we're feeling right now in the economy still exists, or if people are doing better. It's hard to answer those questions. But the 2022 projection that we're utilizing right now is really trying to hold fast the 2021 budget. So we're looking at a couple of years in sort of the status quo service level, whatever the council decides on for 2021, making that hold for a couple of years so that we can ride this out. I think what we can do and honor the work of the Budget Advisory Committee is take the comments that we've heard from the council so far and come back at a subsequent meeting here on November 30th that maybe keeps the groups together with a little bit of moving around, and then walk through sort of a decision tree on a number of the items that the council members have individually mentioned here, rather than try and fashion a consensus or make decisions yet this evening. So it's really good to have this conversation and to hear from each council member what the priority considerations are for you, so that we can bring that back, and if there's additional information we need to have to get a very specific discussion on November 30th.
Councilmember Nelson?
Thank you, Mayor. Just as follow-up, I have a question for the city manager in terms of process that he's thinking about for that conversation, because I have questions or thoughts on probably a handful or so other items within there. Do you want me to go through those at this time? Do you want me to relay those later? I mean, I guess that's a question for both the mayor and city manager of how we might best kind of put those things on the table that we think need to be at least looked at or discussed.
I think it would be helpful if you got, I don't know how big a handful you have, but if you could bring up the questions. I think that was going to be one of my next questions. Were going to be, what else do you need more information on? And so what do you need more information on? Councilmember Nelson, what do you need?
Okay. One, the ranked choice voting. I know we're going to talk about that later. There's a recount possibly or whatever, but that's a budget item that, assuming the count holds, would go in there. I don't know that there's a lot of discussion, but it might help out with some of the things that people have talked about supporting, like the arts funding and things like that. The park, the Bush Lake Beach, and the maintenance of it, there may be an opportunity to work with Three Rivers on some of that. And that would be an area that I'd be interested in exploring more. The community development, the interns for environmental health would be an area that I'd like to look at a little bit more. Like I talked about the police special investigation overtime, because there is a different funding source that we could use for next year. I'd be interested in using that other funding source or looking at the implications of doing that. Again, maintaining that budget or the funding for that overtime, but just from a different source. The athletic field utilization fees, I'm concerned about the impact that'll have on our youth sports organizations, which have been greatly impacted by COVID this year. Their situations are very difficult, and going into next year to add new fees to them may be challenging. Community development director, that was talked about. I think that's a position we absolutely need to fund. Cultural arts grants, I absolutely agree that we need to fund those. the Public Works partially eliminating the trail plowing. I'd just like to know more details about that. I know trails are one of the highest priorities in our community, and particularly in the winter when a lot of indoor things are closed, having outdoor opportunities is important. And then I think that also relates to a conversation we'll have after this about the park maintenance and the ice rinks and where we want to go with that, but we'll have that discussion shortly. So I think those are the ones that I had highlighted that I just wanted to pull forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martin and then Councilmember Lohman. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I'll go quick here as some of these have already been mentioned. Yeah, just kind of this back of the envelope map here. Ranked choice, the special investigator overtime, potentially coming out of DOJ forfeiture fund. Also, it was mentioned in a council question over email, but the council travel and training budget for around 25,000, 25,700. I've got, again, back of the envelope coming out to about $144,000 in savings there, which is almost the community development position. Also just curious, more information on why in scenario B, we've cut 2/3 of the cultural arts grants, but we don't touch artistry support until scenario C. And then kind of wrapped into all of that, how much kind of concrete programming are our community organizations expecting to put on in 2021? Especially if we're not anticipating opening facilities like Creekside until second or third quarter, and how does that affect how much funding they're going to need on the front end? And then, so that's kind of on my minus side of the ledger there. And on things that I'd be curious about retaining and seeing if we could do scenario B plus a few items. As I mentioned before, the sidewalk clearing, even if that's just partial around making sure our transit routes are covered. The development director position, sustainability, as was mentioned, and then seeing if we can retain some of the cultural arts grants funding and potentially offsetting that with reductions in some of our other arts organizations that aren't included right now. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm trying to balance, and I'm imagining it'll be 3% plus 3 or 4 items that are really smack dab in the middle of our priorities, but that's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. I always like to avoid doing the line by line kind of view, but you know, I'd like to, just looking at some of these sheets here in terms of the items here. I've got 5, 6, and 7 from this city budget, operating budget that I had questions about in terms of, you know, it says the impact here in terms of how that'll have some impacts, but I want to understand in terms of staffing. Will it drive overtime up for these positions? What other will we create an experience in terms of employees that are overworked? I just want to know a little bit more about the 5, 6, and 7. I'm certainly willing to talk to you, city manager, offline to have conversations about that. And then when I look at items 74 through 77, I just wanted to understand in terms of, you know, we talked about reduce desks, part-time staffing hours for public works. What does that mean? How is that going to be covered from a coverage standpoint? Wanted to kind of understand about that, you know, in terms of when I think about, you know, our core and also our 7 priorities. You know, certainly that fits in there in terms of making sure we have good customer service. And then neighborhood traffic calming programs. I know that I have in a number of occasions. I know we just saw an accident on, I believe it was 106th Street or 102nd Street in my district. And I wonder what impact that's going to have for traffic within our community. And then as I look at some of these other public works positions, certainly I just want to understand, does that mean we're not going to have a traffic engineer at all, or does this just mean we're eliminating one traffic engineer? I just wasn't clear about this. Normally I don't get down into this level of detail. So I just want to just be sure I'm completely clear if we are eliminating some of those positions, what that means. And then with respect, you know, these are some of the items that were identified here. These some odd items. Are there other items that were not included? in terms of cutting that the budget committee did not look at, and I want to know beyond just that list beyond there that we could have a look at. And really what I'm driving at here is, certainly we've got recommendations before from our committees and subcommittees. And I want to just be sure that we are, as a council, looking at what's the best possible step kind of moving forward. We don't always follow the recommendations from our from our commissions. We did that with ranked choice voting. We decided not to follow the recommendation of our commission there, and with a number of other things. But they have the information that they have. We have a broader point of view. We're looking at a number of other items. And so just want to kind of bring that back to you, Mayor, City Manager, and the rest of the council.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohman. I think these scenarios and these budget reduction possibilities were brought forward department by department based on what the targets were set for them. And I think they looked at what would be best for their department and how best to meet those budget goals while at the same time maintaining the services and meeting the priorities and the goals that they have as a department. So I guess we could, I wouldn't encourage, where we are in the budget process now, encourage going back to the departments and saying, well, come up with another list and find more possibilities. And I would equally not necessarily encourage the council necessarily to pick through and think about their own possibilities, because that would be, it might be a bit more information than we're able to pull together in time to make a final budget decision. I just think these were the suggestions and the ideas brought forward by the departments, by the department heads in consultation with the folks in their department. If you've got something very specific that you've got in mind, maybe we could hear it, but I don't know that I want to go back to the departments and say, come up with more ideas and think about what you might do.
I'll get to you, Mayor. Thank you.
So 2 questions then. Council, any more questions? Staff, do you have enough information to continue to move this forward to November 30th? Council, any additional questions? Staff, do you need additional information, or do you have what you need to continue to move this forward? And if you could, Mr. Verbrugge, maybe if you could, for the council's benefit and for the benefit of the public, bring us through the next steps. Bring us where we're going from here.
Mr. Mayor and council members, thank you. I think we do have enough information. I was pleasantly surprised, Councilmember Nelson. I thought you were going to unveil a scroll like Santa Claus with the items that you had. So, we will make sure that we answer the questions that specific that each of the council members had, and for the item numbers that were identified by Councilmember Lohman and some others for a little more detail, we'll put together additional narrative. And I did want to answer a couple questions before answering your last question there, Mr. Mayor. First, I don't think I was clear at the beginning in terms of how the process worked with the Budget Advisory Committee and how this list came to be. The committee solicited feedback from the community, so there were community-generated ideas they discussed. The committee generated ideas amongst themselves that are items that are represented here. And then the staff went through the exercise with each of the departments and their leadership team working with staff to identify items to put forward for consideration. One of the things that we did internally was prioritize each of the department's lists. We didn't necessarily share that prioritization with the committee because one of the things we wanted to do was not overly influence the discussion that they were having. And so we did at one of the meetings generally discuss how their ranking fit with the prioritization. And I'd say it was pretty close. But one of the things I would like to do with the acceptance of the council is when we go back and prepare for November 30th, I'm just going to have our staff leadership take one more look at this in light of their departmental professional analysis and see if they would recommend any last adjustments. What we will do then is bring back, what I heard from the council is something in the neighborhood of a 3% or 2.5%, somewhere in that neighborhood for a tax levy increase. We will bring back an outline of how you can get there, utilizing the recommendations of the Budget Advisory Committee, and also some options for how we might accomplish it as well. And we will also have, I think, the list of discussion items that people talked about in terms of sort of the individual program discussions, recognizing that it was never going to be just accept option 1, option 2, option 3, and there won't be any changes. Obviously, in your role, you have a broader view of the community, and you take in to consideration things that are beyond maybe the scope of what the committee considered. You obviously speak to a lot of constituents. You represent a number of constituencies, and so I think it's realistic to expect that there's going to be some tweaking in the different bundles, and the co-chairs even recognized that when they made their presentation a couple of weeks ago. So we'll bring back the structure of what it looks like at 2.5 or 3, with some staff recommendations of how you get there, and then we'll have specific items for the council to react to based on the discussion tonight. Does that sound satisfactory, Mr. Mayor?
That does indeed. Council, weighing in, and Councilmember Nelson, I see your hand up. We'll get to you in just a moment here. I'm sorry. Council, does that sound good in terms of the path forward? I believe that is a satisfactory path forward. So November 30th again, and then our final discussion and final decision would be what, December?
Right. Mr. Mayor and council members, the Truth in Taxation hearing is scheduled for Monday, December 7th. As I mentioned earlier, folks should see their Truth in Taxation statement. That's their notice of proposed taxation for next year, should be showing up in their mailboxes if it hasn't already. And it has the details of where and when the hearing is. It'll be virtual. We won't be doing it in person. It'll be December 7th at 7 o'clock. The council will have the option that night of approving the budget, or we have also scheduled December 21st as the final date to approve the budget for 21, if the council wishes to reflect on what they heard at the hearing and discuss further before making a decision.
Good. Thank you much. Thank you for that outline. Council, everybody comfortable with what with that outline that's been laid out and the discussion that we've had here tonight? Anything left to add?
Oh, I did, Mr. Mayor, one more item. I'm sorry, I forgot answering the questions. The question about ranked choice voting and where that fits in. We have already made that adjustment in the budget, so it's not in the CBAC, the Budget Advisory Committee recommendation line items. We plugged those changes into the operating budget before putting the information in the packet for the council. What that entailed was a $75,000 reduction in the city clerk's budget for elections. The ranked choice voting means that we will be eliminating the primary election in 2021 for municipal offices. And the cost of an election, probably $90,000 to $100,000. By reducing the budget by $75,000, we're trying to reserve some dollars just for public education and any transitional expense that we may encounter.
Thank you for that. I think we have a plan. We have a plan moving forward. I think this was a very good discussion. Thank you all very much for that. Ms. Carlson, thanks for the presentation and leading us through this. Council, any final thoughts, or we're moving on? And then, as I said, I think this was a very good discussion. I think this was, it laid out a lot of possibilities and where our heads are at and gives some good direction moving forward. And we've got we're in a good place, I think, to continue this discussion on the 30th. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I will call item 3.3 on our revised agenda, which is the Park System Master Plan. And as we get everybody lined up here, I know that Ann Catry, our Park and Rec Director, is here, and Renee Clark, who's been leading this master plan process, is also with us this evening. Good evening, Ann. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council. I am going to turn it right over to Renee so she can make introductions and get us started.
I actually called on you first to buy some time as we get everything lined up here. So we're supposed to stretch a little bit there. Ann.
Oh, let's see. What kind of a story could I tell you?
Don't bother now.
Today?
Don't bother now. We will wait patiently as Renee gets loaded on here.
Renee, you're muted if you're trying to speak to us. There you go.
Good evening, members of council.
Good evening. Welcome, Ms. Clark.
As I get our presentation ready, I will share my screen as I make introductions. Tonight, we are here to review planning and cost recovery concepts developed from input and studies done so far through this Park System Master Plan process. Joining me tonight from city staff, as you saw, our Director Ann Catry. We also have Recreation Manager Allison Warren, Park Maintenance Superintendent John Bradford, and Assistant Superintendent Dave Hansen. Presenting with me tonight, we've got Brad Aldrich from Confluence, our lead consultant, and Leon Younger from Pros Consulting. Let's see. As my presentation has just froze, I'll continue to describe what we're going to do tonight. We have 60 minutes together for 3 topics. I will be continuing the level of service discussion from August and talking about proposed ice rink reduction sites. Brad will follow up with an introduction of study locations for new amenities, and then Leon will conclude with a review of the cost recovery framework as part of the recreation program assessment. While my presentation's frozen, I am going to close that and reopen it again. And actually, Brad, if you could share your screen, I will stop sharing.
Yes, I will try that, Renee.
Okay.
And Renee, you went into the office to ensure that you didn't have any technical glitches.
My computer has frozen.
I think we see Brad's screen now, and it appears to be working. I think we're good to go.
Okay.
Thank you, Brad. All right. So tonight, the reason we're here, what we're doing and why, the purpose of our Park System Master Plan, again, is to guide decisions for investment in our parks in a planful way through engagement with you and the Parks and Recreation, Parks, Arts and Recreation Commission, and the public. Studies that are underway as part of this plan. We've learned that parks need updating and renewal to reflect changing needs of the community and changing trends in parks and recreation. Staff heard through our individual conversations with you and the Park Arts and Recreation Commission that our parks and park amenities need renewal. We heard for support for increasing fees, which would be complemented by a fee assistance program to improve cost recovery of programs. And we also heard support for a service area model to help create equitable access in planning new park amenities, and then support also for a community-driven planning approach when we do make park improvements to create individual visions for parks through a planning process. So looking at the service area map. Next slide, Brad. We are proposing service areas using council district boundaries by and large as shown on the map. The one deviation we're proposing to council district boundaries is between districts 3 and 4, using the physical barrier of 35W as the boundary for these service area plans, planning filter. So it's a way, this filter is going to be a way to help make recommendations on where to make changes to parks and what changes to make as we create equitable distribution and access across the city. In August, next slide, Brad, we presented a level of service analysis which compares the number of park amenities with a national average with Bloomington's population. So accordingly, we found Bloomington is overserved or has too many compared to this national average of ice rinks, softball diamond fields, and tennis courts. I just want to note that these recommendations in the level of service are based on a national average, more fine-grained study, and using Bloomington specific data will really drive staff recommendations, and we'll talk about that with respect to ice rinks in a second. We also found through the level of service assessment that there are amenities missing or lacking in abundance in Bloomington. Those include inclusive playgrounds, dog parks, Bloomington just has one, skate parks, of which we just have one, mountain bike facilities, which we have none, splash pads, and flexible green space. Tonight, I will first take you through a review of ice rinks and changes to outdoor skating that we propose for this winter. And again, the level of service assessment you saw showed that for a community of Bloomington size, the national standard might be something like 4 or 5. In Minnesota and here in Bloomington, that I think might be too low, and therefore staff is recommending that we keep 8 rinks. Staff's looked at this question from a few perspectives and has looked at it over time. One, we've seen warmer winters, which have made maintaining quality ice challenging. We've seen changing trends in recreation generally, which have shifted neighborhood play to more organized sports in many circumstances. And this year, on the heels of the discussion item before us, city budget challenges due to COVID have led staff to evaluate and recommend this change to the Budget Advisory Committee for this upcoming season as a budget reduction measure. The sites selected to remain are chosen applying the service area concept as a way to look geographically across the city and provide accessible sites throughout Bloomington. We also based our recommendation on information from our parks maintenance and recreational staff based on usage. And then these sites also fit into a larger planning concept that you'll see a little bit of following this discussion about ice rinks, looking at potential locations of park building renewals, which correspond to many of these sites as well. Tonight, staff is looking for council concurrence on reducing the number of outdoor skating sites from 14 to 8, and concurrence on the recommended sites that we will continue to use and decommission for this winter. With that, I'll turn it over to council for feedback and discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. So council, the question in front of us is concurrence looking at reducing the number of skating areas from 14 to 8, and with the map in front of us as to whether or not we're okay with that reduction and where those reductions would take place. Questions or comments? Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, quick question just about the map that we have in front of us here. Maybe I'm missing something, but there seem to be 5 X's, yet I thought we're going from 14 to 8, which would be 6. So can you tell me where the 6th location is?
Ms. Clark?
I'm also looking at the map. And
Tarn Hill doesn't seem to have an X on it.
there we go. So the X would be Tarn Hill Park to the west
Thank you
of
for that.
Big.
Apologize for that error.
No problem. I just want to make sure that people understood and that I understood.
Thank you.
Make sure we understand it. Yeah. In terms of the usage data and all that, is that something that you have that we could see, and how is that gathered?
Ms. Clark?
Councilmember Nelson, council members, Brad, if you could stop sharing your screen and I can pull up a table.
And while Renee's pulling up that table, I'll add a couple of comments. Councilmember Nelson, members of the council. We have a few different ways of collecting user data. For the rink facilities that we have attendance at, one of their main responsibilities, in addition to keeping the facility clean and safe, is to do user counts for the facility. At facilities where we have volunteers, we ask them to take user counts at those facilities as well. And the other bit of information that's really important is information that has been gathered by our park maintenance team. For the last several years, as they've been going out to skating facilities, they're actually keeping detailed notes as to the condition of the ice, which gives us a lot of information about how much utilization that rink is getting. And as Renee mentioned, we do have a couple of members of our park maintenance team. So if you have any additional questions about that, they would be able to answer that for you. Renee?
Thank you, Anne. You should be seeing a table on your screen, which is average total skaters per day collected, as Anne discussed, for the rinks. There are, and this is for the last 3 seasons, you'll see no data for Hague, which is because it wasn't collected. And then no data for Trepa Park, which is actually used for broomball and not skating. And then some missing data for Southwood, which is submitted by volunteers. So I've highlighted the rinks that we are proposing to remain, where you can see that average skater total per day for those seasons.
Okay. And a specific question to the Ridgeview location, is that staff data or is that volunteer data?
Ridgeview is volunteer data.
Do we have any idea how accurate it might be?
That's the reality of this. Is some of the information where staff was, we feel is very accurate, but we also feel that the data that our park maintenance team, who maintains the facility in terms of determining ice utilization, is probably more accurate than some of this data when it comes to the skating facilities that did not have staffed shelter buildings.
And then also with regards to Ridgeview, is that data, does that include any school use of it? Because that's one of the few that in the community next to a school. Is that?
That would not include school utilization. The schools have never reserved any of our rink time. And if they use the rinks, it would probably be in the after school time for an after school program. And we would not have any even volunteers probably at the site at that time.
We know that location and the Oak Grove, which also obviously is at a school, if their after school programs are using that or not?
I'm going to call on Allison and maybe Dave on this question. I apologize, I'm not sure exactly, but I will say that without the reservations and without staff being at either of those rinks, we can't answer that question very specifically. Allison, do you have any other information on either of those sites?
Councilmember Nelson and members of the council, I don't have anything additional to add besides the anecdotal information that the majority of the usage from the schools is not from a specific program, since they're not renting from us or preserving anything, but more recess usage is what our lead staff is seeing while they're driving around turning lights, or after school programming. But we don't have any reservations to confirm that they're using it or not. And beyond that, just something to mention, of the 10 elementary schools, only 4 of those elementary schools do have rinks on site. So just keeping in mind that not every school has that amenity to utilize right now either way.
And then also regarding Ridgeview in particular, because it doesn't have staff, when we look at the budget proposal, there was a savings for closing some of these rinks, but this doesn't have a staff. Would there still be a savings, and what I guess cost implication is there for that location?
There are 2 different savings approaches as it relates to the budget reduction scenarios that we presented to the Community Budget Advisory Committee. The ones that are shown in recreation are the charges that would be for the facilities that have staff and for the staff that drives around to turn on and off lights. The even more substantial part of maintaining the rinks is the fee associated from park maintenance. And it's determined that on average, and this is an approximate cost, but on average, it costs just under $11,000 per rink to maintain those facilities during the winter. So we have the fees for maintaining the shelter buildings, for turning the lights on and off, and then for actually prepping and maintaining the ice.
Thank you very much for answering those specific questions. I just want to say that in general, I am absolutely supportive of the direction of this and appreciate the innovation. I do think that's worth a council conversation in regards to timing of these, whether or not we decommission these maybe potentially years in advance of the new amenities being installed, and what impact that has on those neighborhoods. I also do think that there's some consideration regarding that Ridgeview, just based on the number of people that I have heard that use it, see very popular usage, and the fact that the numbers were driven by more of a volunteer count than a staff-driven count. I would just personally like to see some more information on that one and see if it's possible to get better data before making a decision on that one.
Councilmember Carter, you had your hand up earlier. Did you still have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, one of my questions was around the budget, which Councilmember Nelson addressed in his questions. I guess one question related to the ice rinks that are located next to schools. Have we talked with the school district about what any discontinuation would look like, or if they would have interest in? I mean, I would assume they probably wouldn't have the right type of resources available to keep up those ice rinks, but maybe they would want to provide resources to the city to help maintain them if it was of value to their school. I'm just curious if any conversations have been happening with the school district as it relates to those rinks.
Councilmember Carter, members of the council, we have not had those specific conversations. Quite honestly, in many of the discussions we've had where we have facilities that are operated and maintained by the city on or adjacent to school district property, it is the case because they don't have the resources, the skills, the experience to maintain, inspect and that sort of thing, those facilities. So we have not asked them specifically if they would be interested in partnering on those facilities. And again, I would note that that these are the facilities that our staff have identified as facilities that are less used than others in the community. And I certainly want to add to that, we recognize that losing a park amenity close to folks' home is always very, very difficult. There's no doubt, and it will be definitely felt as a loss. As we looked at these skating facilities, we did our best to geographically locate them throughout the city to ensure that everyone would have a skating facility relatively close to their home. That was very important to us. And as Renee mentioned earlier, it also is included as part of the plan that we were looking at for making reinvestments into shelter buildings that would best serve the community in the future as well. As it relates to the question from Councilmember Nelson about waiting until we have the ability to reinvest in other amenities in the place of some of these skating facilities, that is certainly a worthwhile proposition as well. I think in some of the cases, just opening up some of these skating facilities into green space is going to be a benefit to the community. If you recall, one of the items that Renee mentioned that we were lacking in the community is just flexible green space. And in some areas where we're making skating rinks or we have boards up that are year round, we don't have good grass in these locations. So just having open space, I think, would be a benefit to the community. And as you'll see moving forward, we have some really interesting proposals for some of these skating facilities as well to convert into the new recreational amenities that we're lacking in the community.
That was a second kind of question or point that I wanted to echo that Councilmember Nelson did too. Just that it's much harder to take away an amenity when we don't know the timeline of the new amenity that will be in its place. But I will say, I don't know if other council members received the emails today, but I did receive a lot of emails around the excitement about bike parks. And so I think once we get to a point where, some of the parks where these amenities, the rinks will be taken away and we can say, like, these are the things that we're looking at now, I think people will be a lot more excited. So I also just want to say that I am supportive of this approach too. I know that it's a really difficult proposal to make and decision to make for us. But I think, given our budget situation, if this is the direction we're moving in terms of our budget, this makes a lot of sense, even as we think about kind of the master park plan of the city and making sure we have the right mix of amenities. So I will leave my comments at that.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm going to sort of pick up where Council members Nelson and Carter left off. And maybe this is honestly just because I grew up in the area, but as I look at kind of the area around the borders of, the numbers are service areas 1, 2, and 3 in that Ridgeview area. And this is sort of specific to this skating rink discussion, but also sort of more general to the overall discussion. Looking at the graphic with all of the amenities, that's an area that seems a little bit sparse to me. And I guess part of the I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a concern, but something I just kind of want to put on your radar is that while I think the idea of this service area model is a good one, I think we just need to be careful about remembering that not all service areas are created equal, right? And not where some folks live in one service area is not necessarily as accessible as where some folks live in another one. And, again, I think this is just because I grew up in that area, but you have Highland Park right over there, and that's an accessibility issue, I think, for some folks in terms of ability to navigate around it quickly and efficiently. So I think that's part of the concern that I have specifically with regards to the skating rinks. I'm all for moving in that general direction. I think we are overserved numerically. I just generally kind of want us to think creatively about ensuring sort of equitable access in that sort of physical barrier way. And like I said, again, looking at this graphic with all of the amenities, just zooming in and between Old Shakopee and 90th/Poplar Bridge Road, and then east-west, if you look at the border between, say, Highland and France, the current proposal just has what I would say is a rather sparse collection of amenities. And so just kind of something to think about there.
Member Coulter, members of the council, if I might add as well, we are only at the 50% mark of our park system master plan. And we are not intending at this stage to have a comprehensive look and view of the entire park system and all amenities. We're really just focusing on the amenities that we know that we are specifically short on, as Renee mentioned, with the level of service standards, and then some of the amenities that would fit back into some of these skating facilities that we would be eliminating. But rest assured, we're only at the 50% plan, and the intention of doing this service areas was to take the look exactly as you're describing. So thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
Councilmember Martin.
Wrong buttons. It's not super pressing. I'll take mine off on here.
And then we'll go to Councilmember Lohman.
Try to be quick here. I want to kind of get at this ice skating rink thing here. So if you had a blank map here and you could place these ice skating rinks anywhere in the city, would you put them where they are now?
Councilmember Lohman, that's a very good question. I think it's safe to say, as we looked at the map and some of the facilities that we have right now, we wished that we would have some things differently. But in terms of the skating facilities, we couldn't help but look at the skating facilities that are just so wildly popular right now. And we do have a half a dozen of those skating facilities that are just wildly popular. So it was difficult for us to look at removing any of those facilities. So that was probably our first look, is which are our definite most popular facilities, And then after that, ensuring that we were receiving geographical distribution of the other facilities, with the hope of eventually developing those facilities into better facilities with the improvement of shelter buildings, year-round types of facilities that are going to be able to attract a wide variety of recreation programming on a year-round basis.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is when I remember at some point seeing a map of the density of the city of Bloomington. And when you kind of look at how dense and where the population is, you move further east. And so I kind of looked at that 77 line. And I said to myself, well, wow, there should at least be at least one ice rink facility over there, just in my head, but given what you said, that makes sense. But that's, from a density perspective, I kind of look back on this and kind of say, that's an interesting, from an equity standpoint in terms of where these things lie. I mean, you're not going to get it right no matter what you do, but it just, just a different perspective in terms of how of looking at this thing. And I'm not saying you need to change anything. I just wanted to have a better understanding of where you're looking at this. And to Councilmember Nelson's point of view, I would certainly be interested in a phased approach with that ridge view. I didn't see any other emails, or I didn't see any phone calls from anybody else to just kind of see if we get the count right, if that makes sense, to kind of look at that site. That's all. Thanks.
If I may jump in also before we move on with our presentation, and let the council know as well that our intention here, we would like to get some feedback and direction on rinks, because who knows, the way the winter is going, we might be able to start making rinks within the next couple of weeks. So that is definitely very important to us in terms of direction. But the other thing is that we wanted to run a lot of this information past the City Council, past the Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission, and then we intend to do another significant community engagement run with all this exact same information too, seeking feedback from the community over the next month to month and a half, and then we will report back to the City Council as well on our findings.
Thank you. Councilmember Beloga. Councilmember Beloga, I believe you might be muted. Looks like you're unmuted now. Give it a try now.
There you go. Thank you.
There it is.
Renee, good evening. Thanks for the information. Turnhill has a warming house facility. And can you tell me, does Brookside and Ridgeview have a facility today?
Yes.
They both do.
Yes.
In looking at the equity, I see that service area 1 has 3 and outdoor, and service area 3 has 1 outdoor. Can you tell me why that is equitable? Just looking at it, since we have a couple different options close to the border.
The geographic distribution was one filter we used, Councilmember Beloga and members of council. And knowing that these sites are, largely being utilized with, not by people within walking distance, some utilization within walking, but a lot of utilization also comes with cars. We looked in that area of service area 3 and the utilization data of the existing sites in that region, and the other the Trepa Park is a broomball site which gets has been in the past programmed by an outside group. And Tarnhill and Hague have substantially lower utilization according to park maintenance and the records we talked about compared to the other sites chosen. So looking to create, across Bloomington as a whole and within service areas, that was a filter that drove that decision. So service area approach is a model and a single filter, but also requires a comprehensive look as well.
And if I may add also, Councilmember Beloga, members of the council, Brookside Park is just immediately across the street from Service Area 3. We did have a lot of discussion about that. And again, looking at the facilities that we want to make a significant investment in the future, the size of the park and the types of amenities in the park were very important to us too, as we looked at facilities that would really benefit from a shelter building that offered a year-round venue. The size of the park and the types of amenities that were in that park were really important as we made our recommendations as well.
Ann, thanks for the input. And that's why I am questioning Tarnhill, because it is one of our larger playgrounds and has a lot of undeveloped area in addition to what is currently developed as parks. So it's surprising to me that, and it's on one of our major thoroughfares, so it's very accessible. Mm-hmm. It was a surprise to me to see that one on the list. I understand the usage and utilization, but it seems like some of the characteristics of Tarnhill, and I will grant that Brookside is similar in some of those characteristics, but I'm just surprised at that.
I would add one more thing, Councilmember Beloga, and this isn't specific to the Tarnhill conversation, but I would be remiss to my park maintenance colleagues to also not mention the one of the other main areas for consideration was the quality of ice at those facilities, the soil conditions, the ability to make and maintain ice. Was also another key factor in our decisions for the facilities.
Okay, thank you.
So, Council, I will say we first talked about this, I don't even know how long ago, 6 weeks ago or so, and we kind of gave a nodding approval to consider the closure of the outdoor skating rinks for budget reasons and for just practicality, for lack of use and that kind of thing. And I understand some hesitancy or questioning about which were chosen and why or how. But I think it goes back to one of the first things that we talked about, that if we're going to make budget decisions, it's going to be people are going to be affected. Different facilities, different services are going to be affected. Now we can say we don't want to reduce from 14 to 8, that we want to just keep the 14 that are there and continue to do it this winter. But then that has a budget impact, and we've got to figure out how to pay for that. And I'm open to that as a possibility if folks want to say, no, let's keep it and maybe get a more accurate count or reevaluate exactly where everything is going or try to get the schools involved. We can do all of that, but there will be a budget impact to it for this year, for as we travel along here. So if we want to go from 14 to 8 based on staff's recommendation, we can. If we'd rather leave it at the 14 and come back with more information, we can do that as well. And I would open that up to council, as we seem to be kind of hung up right now on skating rinks and locations. Councilmember Coulter, and then Councilmember Nelson and Councilmember Beloga, if that is a unique hand or if it's the same hand up. Coulter, Nelson, and Beloga, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think you hit the nail right on the head with that, with that last comment. And I guess just to sort of clarify my previous remarks, like I said, I was speaking both specifically to the rinks, but also more generally. But, for myself, I have absolutely no problem going from the 14 to the 8. I think I've made myself clear on how I feel about the areas in which we are overserved. And the reality is that clearly this is one of them. So I think I'm perfectly comfortable with staff's recommendation here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Would be comfortable going from 14 to 9 and get more information regarding Ridgeview, just based on the number of people that have contacted me that use that would like to see it open. To Councilmember Beloga's point about the service area 3, that is also on the border, and it serves a portion to the north of it along Highland there. And I think actually Councilmember Coulter had in his comments kind of talked a lot about that area being a little bit isolated in terms of facilities. I also think it's important this year to have outdoor amenities available for our community, with so many of the indoor activities and things like that closed and shut off, and trying to find things for families, for kids to do to remain active, safely see friends and family and things like that. I would very much hesitate to close a rink that so many people have asked us to keep open this year, if we can at all do that.
Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have recalled saying a number of times that too many of our rinks were underutilized, that as I drove through the city, you would find the rinks empty. So I want to move forward and make a decision tonight on closing. But I just want to make sure that we continue to serve the population and where they are, and have accessibility be important. So my question of Ridgeview, Tarnhill, Brookdale, I think still merits some discussion on which one of those should remain open to serve the needs in that general area. But I can go with 8 or 9, as the number of rinks going forward.
Councilmember Lohman.
Yeah, I could do 8 or 9. And one suggestion I might make for the Parks group, just to help with the service area 3 problem, we could move that line down to 102nd Street, and that would, basically put another one in service area 3. There you go. Quick solution.
We can gerrymander a solution if we really need to, right?
Got to get it done somehow, right?
What if we did as a compromise, again, considering the number of calls and emails that we have received, what if we leave Ridgeview on the list this year? We make the reduction from 14 to 9 and ask Parks to figure out a way to make that work, and perhaps do a more thorough count or more comprehensive count, considering that it being close to a school, that perhaps Ridgeview does get a lot of school traffic or after school use or class use. And then if we need to revisit this in the future, we can. I mean, we can take a look at our numbers this winter. We can take a look at the demand we see this winter, and maybe if we need to revisit this, we can as we go along. Would that be acceptable to both the council and to park staff? I'm not seeing any stop signs, so I'm going to assume it's a yes.
Works for me.
Very good.
Mayor, may I just mention one thing? The one issue that we're going to have this year is because our shelter buildings aren't going to be open and we don't have any skating staff. I don't want to set the expectation with the city council that we're going to have great data this year for skating rink utilization, because we do not have staff and we do not have the financial resources to hire staff, especially to do rink counts. So we're happy to do the 9 rinks if that's what you prefer. But we likely will not have any better data for you going into next year.
I appreciate that. Perhaps, especially with Ridgeview, it would be a matter of just tapping into the school and figure out what kind of usage they get, and if they use those, like I said, for Phi Ed classes or after school programs or however they might use them. So, but understood. Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mayor. To that point exactly, given that the Bloomington School District has moved to all distance learning for at least I think the next few months, I guess I'm not sure how could we quantify school usage at Ridgeview if students aren't physically in the building?
Well, and that's a very good point as well. I will suggest once again that we go forward with the 9 as opposed to the 8. Let's keep Ridgeview in the mix. And if we need to reevaluate or revisit this at this time next year, we will be able to do so.
We're happy to do that, Mayor.
Let's do that as a compromise and continue moving forward with the presentation here on the Parks Master Plan.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council, for that input. We're going to move rather quickly through the rest of the level of service discussion. We talked about council requested, when we're taking away things, rinks, ball fields, what are we going to put back in their place? And I'll turn the presentation over for a preview of proposed locations for new amenities across the park system, which our level of service is identified as lacking or missing. These maps will go out on the Let's Talk Bloomington site for public input on proposed locations, and we will bring that information back to you in January. After the review of those service area maps, we will have a cost recovery explanation and short discussion led by Leon Younger.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, council members. A lot of these amenities we had talked about previously with a number of residents and indeed with you in some of the interviews. And like Renee mentioned, it's really looking at how we can attempt to kind of rebalance the system and make it a little bit more pertinent to today's Bloomington. So Councilmember Coulter mentioned this map previously. This is looking at all the new proposed facilities in the city. And I think the thing to note here is that we were striving kind of using these service areas and looking at equity. And you will notice that service area 4 does have, I guess, the most amount of kind of new proposed facilities because that is a higher area of density of population. And quite frankly, has been underserved in the past with parks. So something to keep in mind as we move through. Next slide, Renee. I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly. This area amenity we talked about is having a nice sort of a neighborhood park building that could kind of serve as a sort of a park hub for that area in each of these service areas. And again, you'll notice in service area 4, we do have 3 of them proposed on the boundaries, but these are things that we looked at the park, the surrounding neighborhood, the park suitability. We talked to staff and even talked to people in the neighborhoods about where they think might be a good solution. So we're definitely interested in hearing your feedback and feedback from the public on where these proposed facilities and buildings might be. Next slide. One of the things that we know people have requested, and I think makes a lot of sense, is inclusive playgrounds. And we're thinking that we're going to have 2 to 3 inclusive playgrounds in the city. So we've shown 5 here just to kind of spur some conversation and get some feedback. Again, looking at kind of geographic distribution, I think, Dred Scott and Valley View make a lot of sense. These parks facilities really require some parking and, you know, a lot of other amenities that would accommodate and help kind of support inclusive play. So we're definitely interested to see what the public has to say and get your feedback on these proposed locations as well. Skate park locations. There is one existing skate park at Valley View, and we think that that could be really the city's premier skate park, and it should be expanded. There's room for it there. It could be enhanced and expanded. That would be kind of for sort of a first step, if you will. And we think that we could, you know, incorporate 2 to 4 of them throughout the city. You can see the larger icons. We're looking at those as more of a community-based skate park. Would be a little bit larger, kind of more challenging situation. And those smaller icons are potentially locations for we're calling neighborhood facilities that would be a little smaller, easier, you know, better for beginners and neighborhood kids that would work their way up to the community facility. Splash pads. The current one at Cedar Crest is very popular. Splash pads are loved by a lot of people, and you will notice that we are not showing one in the southwest area. And that was intentional. We had a lot of discussions about that and went back and forth. We felt that the beach at Bush Lake was an aquatic facility that was serving the west side. It's a unique facility. So we really wanted to kind of, again, kind of come back to equity and chose 2 locations to have 2 splash pads in service area 4. Dog parks again is something that we've been hearing a lot from about. And we have the really nice dog park on the southwest side. We are looking at one of the major facilities being a search area for a dog park, and we're looking along the utility corridor. I think that could be a really great spot. One of the challenges we have with trying to find a place for a dog park on the east side is just looking at the park sizes, and justifying taking up that space with a dog park that could be used for, you know, other activities and amenities. So I think the utility corridor could be a really interesting opportunity. And just really quickly on the dog parks, the smaller icons represent neighborhood facilities. So these might be areas that have hockey boards up in the summer that could be used. That's currently how they're being used, or hockey boards that are being taken down, like at Hague Park, that could be used as a smaller dog park facility. Bike skills parks and pump tracks has already come up tonight, and we've definitely heard from the public about these. These are newer facilities, and we've located a few in each service area in areas that we think might be really appropriate. Some of the things that we're looking at is just kind of the geographic distribution, but also kind of locating them along trails that we felt could easily be accessed. And I think we're looking at having a variety of these facilities, so not all of them would be the same. Some of them could be geared more towards mountain biking, but some of them could be kind of more broad and based on mountain bikes and attractive to mountain bikes, scooters, skateboards, and kind of have an appeal for a wide range of people using them. And lastly, looking at pickleball, and one of the amenities that we don't have in Bloomington here is cricket fields. We know that there is cricket being played informally on some of these fields, and we're proposing to have 2 of them throughout the city. And we want to get some feedback on where we think those might best apply. It is worth noting that we really feel Valley View is could be a really incredible spot. From a pickleball standpoint, there's just a lot of things going for it at that site, so that could be potentially a premier facility in the city. So those are kind of some of the facilities and infrastructure that we really think could help kind of bring the park system back into balance. And of course, another major part of that is programming. Not only those sites, but just the facilities that you currently have. So Leon Younger from Pros Consulting is going to talk a little bit more about programs and some of the work that we've been doing. Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Younger. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to share our insights here. We did an assessment of the core programs that is offered by the city. And people will ask, well, what's the criteria of a core program? Typically, it provides for a long period of time and is expected by the community. The program area consumes a large portion, at least 5% or more of the agency's overall budget. The program area is offered 3 to 4 seasons a year. The program area has wide demographic appeal. There's a tiered level of skill development available within the program. There's usually is dedicated full-time staff responsible for the program area. There are facilities designed specifically to support the program area, and the agency controls a significant percentage, 20% or more of the local market. So that constitutes what we would consider core programs. And in your agency, the list that's there are the core programs as we see it within the organization that you're providing to the community now. Next slide.
So I'll note that health and fitness and environment and nature are two potential new core program areas that are supported by the statistically valid survey, but that will be evaluated kind of pursuant to the recommendations of this program.
Okay, thank you, Renee. One of the things that we recognize as part of our assessment was looking at cost of service and cost recovery. Ideally, when agencies look at a cost of service model, they typically classify their programs and services based on benefit to the public. So what's a public good, what's a private good? And to do that, they typically provide or conduct a cost of service analysis to calculate the full cost of programs, both direct and indirect costs, and then establish a cost recovery percentage for each program or program type so that there's consistency across the programs in the city, and there's a way of determining and demonstrating to the public good and the private good of that service. Next slide. So what that looks like is that when we classify services, we start with what's essential. And so there's an expectation across all cities of essential services that protects the assets and the infrastructure is expected and to be supported by sound investment of public funds is a broad public benefit. So essential services are like special events where everybody has the same opportunity to go to it. It's relatively the same. There's usually no cost for events. It brings your community together, and there's an expectation by the community that the city will provide it. Then there's important services that are provided, which really expands or enhances core service, is broadly supported and used as conditional public support. There is an economic and social environmental outcome associated with that, and it has community importance, and it needs moderate subsidy. These types of programs provide a public good and a private good. And in those situations, usually those incorporate like a youth sports program. It's a public good because you want to teach life skills to youth in different types of programs. But there's also a private good because you're providing it to the community for a league or a clinic, or where the person gets the private good as well. And then there's value-added services, which are services that adds to those programs. And if you that's more private focused than public focused. If you go to the next slide, we kind of broke this out from the assessment of the recreation programs of the staff, working with the staff. So when we classify core essential programs, you can see on the left those programs that fall into those areas, like Camp Coda and Summer Adventure Playgrounds. These are programs that are adaptive programs that are typically expected by the community, has strong community support, and are considered essential. When you get into important programs, that's this public good and private good. You can see that the programs that are classified there through staff input have that public and private good associated with it. And then the next slide kind of has those programs that you offer that are value added, that basically, I'll use a picnic shelter as an example. If the picnic shelter is first come, first serve, then it's an essential service because whoever gets there first gets the shelter. But if I get a shelter and I get it permitted and I'm the only one who gets to use it, I have a right that takes away from somebody else. It's still, most picnic shelters are still supported by tax dollars, but there's a fee that's associated with the right to access the shelter. Or as an example, if my daughter has a wedding at one of the parks and it's exclusive, the intent of that is I have exclusive use for a private event. What's the value of that? And in most cases, they are classified as services that the user would pay full price. And so those are listed on in the screen there on the right that fall into that category. Go to the next slide. So when we look at this, when we look at core essential must provide, we broke your programs down how we viewed it and got feedback from your staff that currently right now about 9% of the programs that are provided by the city are essential, 30% are important, and 61% are value added. And on the left of the screen really talks about kind of how the essential, important, value added is, that criteria is played out both in costing of the service, but also in the benefits that the users get over a general taxpayer. And the only reason we bring this forward because it really helps to the staff to, one, create fairness and equity across the city, but also to make sure that as they provide services, they kind of run through this process and then seek council support through a pricing policy that addresses this classification. So across the city, there is fairness by any program that is important to your community and that the community feels would benefit them either on a private basis or a public basis. Next slide. So when we talk about cost of service and cost recovery, these are the costs that are typically included that are basically direct and indirect costs. And one of the recommendations is we would recommend that you do a full cost of service analysis to calculate the full cost, not just direct cost, but the full cost, and then work towards a cost recovery policy for all your programs and facilities, because it just helps create the greatest level of consistency across the system. And if you want to subsidize programs at a greater level or not, that's up to the council. But more importantly, fairness is a major element in how you account for the cost. And in doing that, that does demonstrate direct and indirect costs across the system. Next slide. So kind of from our perspective and the goals, we listed out all the program areas and best practices in cost recovery. So in adaptive recreation, typically it's 0 to 25%. Usually that 25% is for when there's something that's associated with transportation or a special need beyond beyond what you would normally provide in the program. But most of those adaptive programs are low cost or no cost. In adult athletics, the range is 25 to 75%. Some adult athletic programs are up in the 100%. Aquatics, 50 to 100%. And you can see across here, it varies by best practices, where the core program falls. But probably more importantly is, how much do you want to invest in your users, as well as what's fair and equitable across the city. And what we're recommending is you consider best practices so that the best balance of the type of programs are consistent across the city. And when you develop new types of programs or new facilities, that you work through this process so you're creating consistency across the system. And that's one of the recommendations that we're bringing forward. But one of the key components here is we don't have a full cost of service assessment that's in place, but we're doing it based on what the staff had indicated their approach to it and what they include in their cost, and then where they fit versus best practices as a recommendation moving forward for recreation program services. Next slide. So based on this, we recognize there are some proposed fee increases I saw listening in on your budget that Ann and Renee was bringing forward. And these would be to try to help balance out the fairness across the city. Look at evaluation of pricing strategies. And a lot of times pricing strategies can be dynamic in terms of, public versus private, prime time versus non-prime time, off season. You can, the way people price today is to maximize and activate as many of the spaces you have through different pricing mechanisms, resident, non-resident, that kind of thing, just to make sure that nobody gets left out, but everybody has an opportunity to move to a price point that they're comfortable with, or whether you want to subsidize it, that's a policy issue on the council. And then consistently look at annual life cycle evaluation, because all programs have a life cycle. Sometimes they're longer than others. And so consequently, when they go through their life cycle, when to get out or change a program based on the city subsidizing a program more than it needs to. And then really doing what I call mini business plans for each program area that really focuses on how much of the market you control, where and how, what cost recovery levels that you're presenting now. And if that's where the council sees that price point to be, who benefits, and then really targeting, maximizing the widest age segment appeal for programs so nobody gets left out, and then incorporating different methodologies to encourage people to use your programs. And in certain ways, you already do that at your golf course now. At Big, you do it. It's just creating that across the system for all the services that you provide in programming. Next slide. Okay.
So that concludes our presentation of the cost recovery goals, kind of following up on that question and discussion about program fees and how to bring fees more in line with market rate and better support investment in our parks. What we're seeking feedback tonight on are the ranges where we placed on the core programs that we have today. And with your concurrence, Council, we would then move forward over the next year with the recommendations of this assessment, doing mini business plans with program staff and finance, really looking at true cost of service and pricing strategies and setting cost recovery goals based on the ranges that you concur on, and then using that when we put forward fees as part of the annual process in the coming year. I did note that we are proposing some fee increases you'll see from staff. I believe it's at our next meeting. And those we felt are incremental adjustments to help move towards getting to these ranges, but would be further supported and adjusted based on business plans in the coming year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor and Council for any questions or comments, and then your concurrence on the ranges of cost recovery for these core programs.
Council questions on the cost recovery goals. Councilmember Martin, and then Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I very much support kind of heading in this direction generally, not only because it sounds like it's something that would have been helpful to be doing for a while, but the revenue this generates, how much it's going to help us evolve the system moving forward. I guess just kind of two quick questions. I noticed kind of with that core important value add with the senior programming specifically, it skewed pretty heavily towards the important category in the value add. Just to clarify, is that the senior programming that we currently offer is 72% value add, or senior programming generally tends to fall towards that end?
You want me to take that, Renee, or are you taking it?
Please.
Well, typically in senior programs, there's seniors make up 40% of or 40 years of a senior's life, typically 55 to 95 or 60, whatever. But the intent is there are type of services that are more social, and those typically are at low cost or no cost. And then there are senior services that are much more health and fitness related. They do a lot of trips and travel programs and different types of programs that are more individual based. And so consequently usually requires kind of a two-tier approach to programming in general. And how much is it a private benefit to the senior or to more of a social benefit that has a lower level of expectation and cost to provide the service. And so by looking at that, you can see there's usually a pretty wide spread based on what you feel is an appropriate subsidy, but usually on the social side is where the costs are relatively very low, and most of the time those programs are more for the older adults than they are for the active adults.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And my other question, should we anticipate, obviously we're trying to strike that balance of generating maximum revenue while allowing the maximum number of residents to participate in some of this. Should we anticipate a few year period of trial and error of kind of adjusting these prices and trying to hit that sweet spot, or what does that look like?
The best way is to know your cost up front and then determine what its classification is, and then from there set your price point. And usually in most price points, there's a prime time and a non-prime time. And so it usually has a range. And that range gives the flexibility to the staff based on how popular the program is and how much personal benefit the user gets.
Okay, perfect. I also know this is my first meeting in quite a while that I'm not wearing headphones, and it would be the one where people say dog park repeatedly very loud, because I'm sure my black lab is running laps right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you. Looking at some of the charts, and let's pick one of the three areas that I want to talk about, and those three are aquatics, golf, and the ice arena. The bandwidths are different, and I understand why they're different. But as a baseline, I believe that the bandwidths would include capital improvements. Is that correct?
Did you mean that it includes the capital costs?
Yes.
Well, one of the things we talked about today with the finance staff was, I'm not sure where the city's philosophy is. What I find is most cities do not cover the capital costs within the program. I would say about 60 to 70% of the agencies we work with don't, but about 30% do. It depends on how they sold that facility on the front end to the public, that were they going to replace that cost, or is it going to include the capital cost or capital replacement? If it's going to include not the capital to build it, but it includes a cost for capital replacement, then they include that capital replacement usually at 3 to 5% a year into a replacement account. So they have dollars always to update the facility as it hits 10 or 20 or 25, 30 years. But what I find, it usually comes down to that, how did they sell that facility? And then secondly, they follow that process. But I would say that 70% of the people or agencies we work with don't incorporate the capital cost on the front end as part of an overall a cost, but then they do on the back end of it have a replacement program, usually in the 3 to 5%, to have onboard capital to take care of what they just built. And philosophically, I think that's a recommendation that needs to come forward, that become something that the city sets, especially in the area of aquatics and the ice arena and golf.
Yeah, because all of those are capital intensive, and that's why I picked on those. And I think at some future time, we as the council need to talk about that expectation because we're looking, and it's stretched out, but there's a couple proposals coming forward. If you looked in the CIP, one for aquatics to do some, restrooms and some of the other buildings. I think it's a $5 million price tag in the next 2 to 4 years. And that's more than the revenue probably over that same span of time. So I think you got a gist of why I'm talking about this. And we really need to gain a good understanding because the thing that I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around is when we say it's individually based and beneficial. So when I go to aquatics, golf, and ice, I say, boy, that's the definition of those three. So
correct. So if somebody's taking a golf lesson, why should the taxpayer pay for a golf lesson or a tournament
for that matter?
Right. And so, but the big thing is truly understanding your costs up front. And it sounded to me like in a lot of the situations within the city from the finance director today, that she said that they do incorporate and try to incorporate the capital costs associated with the facility. And I just think that needs to be ironed out. It's hard to include capital costs when a facility's, in its life cycle is in its downside, because if you haven't saved for that money, then you have to repair it with updated tax dollars. And so I just think the whole philosophy of how the city approaches revenue producing facilities needs to be addressed.
Well, and our approach has been for aquatics, golf, and the ice arena is to call those enterprise funds.
Right.
The definition says that they should be self-sustaining rather than tax supported. And of course, we're tax supporting each of them to a greater or lesser extent, depending upon what capital improvements are made at that time. But so to staff, I encourage us to have, before we get too much further, particularly on these three items, a deep, in-depth discussion on what our expectations are and what's reasonable for cost recovery. And then we can also look at that and apply it to the CIP in addition, because how cost recovery comes in, to me, says what the investment priorities should be for that area. I have no other comments to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Beloga. Councilmember Lohman.
So, this is an interesting question. And it kind of brings me back to a question that I've asked before of staff, and maybe it's out there, but one of the things that I look at all of these different programs and things that we provide, and not to say that we've got to compare ourselves to other cities, but I am interested to see what what other cities provide, from a program and from a kind of services kind of area. And really, when I look at these, the idea of an enterprise fund, is it realistic for these enterprise funds, as they were, to be self-sustaining in the environment that we have? Do you get to a point where your cost recovery is so high that no one uses your amenities at all, and so you have these programs and these things that are available? And I wonder, what is that price point? What is that? When we look at certain markets or certain ones of these areas, where do you get to a point where we start seeing a decline in those folks who participate? And then further to that question, with the demographics that we have within our city, when do we get to a certain point where certain folks are impacted and they can't participate? So whether it be socioeconomic constraints or just widely different demographics where the price point just becomes, I'm not interested in doing that. There's other places where I can go and take on that service somewhere else and get a better value for the price that's out there. So I don't know if that at all is helpful, but as I look at this, first I have to look and see, one, where's the marketplace for this? Our competitors around us, and what do they provide? And what's separate? I don't know what that noise is in the background. It's kind of distracting me. Sorry, folks. But that's what I'm looking at when I look at these particular program areas, and how we should look through each one of these program areas and what the cost recovery should be. Those factors. So
that's a very good point, and I agree with you 100%. The biggest thing is you have to have a philosophy. Most park systems have a philosophy of low cost, high volume. And then most of the time they look at a prime time or a non-prime time. And so that they don't want to exclude anybody. And most agencies set up some kind of a scholarship program or a discount program to make sure that nobody gets left out as part of it, either their park foundation or through a friends group. But the more importantly is you can establish that as part of the policy. If you don't have a policy, then you really leave it up to the program person who manages that program to make that decision versus having consistency across the system.
Thank you for that. Yeah, there's more to it, I'm sure, but I certainly have some questions about that. And have you seen it where cities pull out those enterprise funds, make those separate, and then run the rest of the programs? Because that's sort of where I keep getting tripped up here, is I'm looking at these ones that are in here, they're enterprise funds, and I'm like, well, technically, these should be at a different standard, question mark, should they be? And then, these other ones, what do they need to be at? So that's sort of where I'm at when I look at this. And there's certainly some demographic questions and there's some sustainability questions that I have. And certainly we need to have that in the policy. So thank you. Thank you for this.
Okay.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question just in terms of if there are benchmarks or ways to measure some of the ancillary benefits. When I look at things like ice arenas or even just general athletics, golf, things like that, we know that a lot of people come in for tournaments or they'll come into our community from neighboring communities and go out to eat or grab a beer after their game or something like that. Are there benchmarks or standards or ways of measuring those benefits of having these facilities, these programs within our community?
Good question. Yes. Most agencies that have high levels of regional appeal usually do an economic impact study every year or every 2 years that demonstrates the economic value of that amenity. On retail, on spending, on tournaments in town, on food service, and things that basically that you are getting as a secondary benefit by hosting that event at one of your facilities. And in swimming, it's swim meets, and you understand this. So the biggest thing is being able to put in as part of your costing program an economic impact assessment along with the pricing program, so that you're capturing both, not just the cost and the revenue, but its overall impact to the city, especially when it comes to tournaments or events that bring people in. And you all get this, I know you do. So it's just applying it to a recreation program or an event.
Council, any other questions on cost recovery goals, or can we move on? Ms. Clark, I think you've got a couple more slides to finish this up.
Mayor, members of council, we are at the end of our presentation. And as staff, we're looking at our next steps and applying the ranges and this framework of core, essential, and value-added services and kind of where we've placed our programs, in coming back with more discussion on some of the things requested and applying that these ranges to the business plans, which will be under development.
All right.
So unless there's objection to kind of that overall framework presented, staff will continue to gather more specific information on developing business plans with true cost of service, and a deeper dive discussion on some of those enterprise facilities mentioned. Where we are in the process, just as we wrap up, there has been a lot of community engagement, a lot of analysis and plans like the ones we've talked about tonight, which are starting to inform a CIP framework and prioritization and funding, which we're now starting to see. So look for more information as we're producing kind of at this 50% level, more detail for your review in January. And with that, thank you for the great discussion tonight. I know we went far over time, but it was very, very helpful for staff.
It was a helpful discussion. Councilmember Carter, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I guess kind of both. Thank you, Mayor. So, I think Councilmember Beloga was alluding to this too in his comments, but Mr. Younger mentioned a few times, park philosophy or policy related to kind of the finance piece. And so is the idea that we would create the park master plan and then we would kind of revisit those conversations, or because I feel like those are really kind of high level, big picture, strategic conversations that we should be having. And so I'm curious, at what point will we kind of revisit where we're at as a council as it relates to our park philosophy and any policies that would follow that?
Councilmember Carter, members of the council, I'll jump in on that one. We are definitely wanting to include very specific recommendations on all of these concepts as part of the Park System Master Plan. What we're doing is we're working with Leon and his team to establish best practices that really follow in line with the National Recreation and Park Association standards for the very best park systems in the country. So all of the recommendations that Leon and his team are making regarding cost recovery and everything else that Leon is presenting, it's to fall in line with National Recreation and Park Association standards. And we definitely intend to continue to have these conversations with you. We keep kind of building on the conversations as we go through this process. We're introducing these concepts to you, and we will eventually come back with more specific recommendations for you to approve as part of the Park System Master Plan.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I will say thank you to staff and thank you to Mr. Aldrich and Mr. Younger for joining us and for sticking with us later in the evening than I think you anticipated, but I appreciate it and look forward to continuing to see the work that you produce and as we work toward the completion of this Park Master Plan, which is looking good. I think it's exciting stuff. So thank you so very much.
This was very helpful. Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's move on to item 3.4 on our agenda, which is the recount petition that was just received earlier today, I believe. A group of citizens asking for a recount on question 3 on the ballot, which was regarding ranked choice voting. Mr. Verbrugge?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Chris Wilson, who is our acting city clerk and coordinated the election process. She has been working with our legal team to understand the process, both with receiving the petition and also to estimate the cost associated of conducting the recount. as was indicated to council, there is no mandatory recount, and there's a margin difference that needs to be considered in terms of who pays for the cost of a recount. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris at this time.
Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Jamie. As has been noted earlier today, late this morning, the city received a petition for a recount of ballot question number 3 from the November 3rd general election. Ballot question number 3, as you'll recall, asked the residents whether or not they wish to adopt ranked choice voting as the method of voting when electing the mayor and city council of Bloomington. And as you may recall from certifying the votes on Friday night, it prevailed 51.19% in favor of it. There was a vote difference of 1,181 more yes votes than there were no votes. We are still in the process of evaluating the petition that was submitted. It needs to have 25 signatures from registered Bloomington voters and meet a couple of other different standards in state law. It has a significantly more than 25 signatures on it, though, so I think there's a lot of room for it to meet that 25 signature threshold as we go through and verify the signatures belong to registered voters. Knowing that the council was meeting tonight and we wanted to get the portion of this process that you play in front of you, and that is that the governing body must certify an estimated cost for the recount, and then the petitioners would have to put up a bond or other kind of financial support to cover that cost of the recount. So there is an item added to your packet tonight, which is a resolution, and that resolution asks you to certify the cost of the recount at $12,259. I recognize that that is not a small dollar amount. That cost estimate works on the assumption that it will take 4 teams of 2 election officials per team working for 40 hours to do a hand recount of the 55,000 Bloomington ballots that were cast in the election. Plus, it is a requirement that either the city clerk or the deputy city clerk supervise their work, and a little bit of ancillary costs to move and secure the ballots to start and end the recount. So I think I'll stop there and see what questions council might have.
Council questions on this. Councilmember Coulter and then Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, do you know off the top of your head you told us how many more votes yes received than no, but the result is, the reason there is a recount is because it's within 0.5% of 51%. Do you know offhand just what the vote difference is between what yes received and what that 51% number would be?
I do not know off the top of my head. This threshold for a public recount has to do with the difference between the number of yes and no votes, not between how close to 51% or how far away from 51% it is.
Oh, interesting. I that makes sense. I was not aware of that. Thank you. And then I understand, of course, staff is still looking over the petition. Are we allowed to know specifically who the petitioners were?
That is a good question. I would look to any of our legal counsel that's on the line to know if they know if that's public information, the name of the petitioner.
Ms. Manderscheid, Mr. Zuniga, any update on that?
Mayor, members, we can certainly look into that. I will defer to Peter in case he happens to know the answer off the top of his head. We did obviously some preparation work on this once we saw the election results, but we are still leaning into some of these specifics.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, council members, the name of the petitioner would be public information.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Council, additional questions? Councilmember Beloga, you had your hand up. Was that an old hand or a new hand?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, it's an old hand.
Okay. Ms. Wilson, is just for the record, is this a mandatory recount?
There is no such thing as a mandatory recount where a vote total automatic. I guess I should say there's no such thing as an automatic
yeah, that's a better
recount
way
in
of putting it.
Minnesota. But if the petitioner has submitted a valid petition that meets the standards set out in state statute, which includes posting the bond to cover the cost, then yes, we would have no choice but to proceed with the recount in that circumstance.
But this isn't a situation like we have heard of in other states or in other municipalities. If the vote total is within a certain amount, that it is an automatic recount regardless, and that's not the case here.
We do not have automatic recounts in Minnesota.
Very
In
good.
every case, they have to be petitioned, and then the question is just who's going to pay for the recount. If they're close enough, they get publicly funded. If they don't meet that threshold, then they have to be paid for by the petitioner.
Understood. Okay. All right. Council, additional questions, comments on this? This was a late addition, so I hope you've had a chance to take a quick look at the resolution. And if you had, I would look for a motion to adopt this resolution and move this forward.
Mayor, I'm happy to make the motion.
Councilmember Martin.
I move that we adopt the resolution setting cost of a recount of city ballot question number 3.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Do we have a second? Well, I will second it if no one else will. So we have a motion setting the cost of the resolution of a city ballot, the recount of the city ballot question number 3. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Beloga.
unfortunately, I could not hear the motion.
Oh, Councilmember Martin made the motion that was supplied in the packet, was to adopt the resolution setting the cost of a recount of city ballot question number 3.
Got it. Thank you.
Council, further discussion? Councilmember Carter.
Mayor, so just to clarify, we would set that cost, and then that cost would have to be paid before any work would commence in terms of the recounting.
Ms. Wilson, I believe it's a bond that needs to be posted. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Hearing no further questions? Ms. Christensen.
Thank you. Beloga?
Aye.
Carter? Sorry, I didn't hear you. Councilmember Carter?
Aye.
Thank you. Coulter?
Aye.
Lohman?
Aye.
Martin?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Mayor Bussey?
Aye. Motion carries 7-0. So if we have the adequate number of signatures, if a bond is posted, we will be doing a recount on ballot question number 3 regarding ranked choice voting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Very good. Let's move on to our final item for this evening, item 3.5, which is the council policy and issues update. Mr. Verbrugge, do you have anything for us on this evening?
Mr. Mayor and council members, I have a couple items. One, we have a panel talking about homelessness on Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock. The city can, if residents are interested, go to the city website and look for the information on that. We have a number of panelists, both from city staff, from county, and some service agencies. So trying to broaden people's understanding, especially during the pandemic, of how the homelessness crisis is being experienced and how it affects communities. It should be a good panel. The other item I wanted to share is that we have been working with the state of Minnesota to identify a location for a testing facility for COVID. And I'm hoping to have more information in the next couple of days as we work out details with the state. As we've seen these facilities coming online, it is matching the great demand that is being experienced. If there are people in the community right now who wish to be tested, the nearest location is going to be at the airport. They have a quick saliva testing process there. And I know a couple folks who have used that facility already, and it's a pretty slick setup. So if there are people who are looking for somewhere to go, and I want to reiterate a message from earlier tonight that our acting public health administrator shared, that the governor, Minnesota Department of Health, are all encouraging anybody between the ages of 18 and 35 to get tested, whether you're symptomatic or not. It is really important to help control the spread, that especially young people get in, get tested, and stay safe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Council members, anything to bring forward this evening? I see no hands coming up. So
I've got a question here.
Councilmember Lohman.
Yep. Sorry, maybe just didn't see my hand, but I'll go ahead and ask. So just a quick question. I got an email kind of passed down through me about some work that was done on some restrooms in City Hall, and I wanted to just check in on that because I know that certainly I was supportive of it. I just happened to be sick that day back on Monday, January 27th, but the council was wiser than me and voted it down that night. But I wanted to see if what's going on with that. I know there's some folks who had some questions about that. I just wanted to make sure. I know that certainly just help me understand that. So,
sure. Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, the request that came in from a resident was asking, based on something they had heard from somebody else who had been in our facility, if we had gone ahead and proceeded with changes that were considered back in January, and the council chose not to proceed with the project at that time. And that was an upgrade of the restroom facilities in Civic Plaza. The answer is no, we have not proceeded with any work that the council did not authorize. The person said it was there were touchless water faucets. We've had touchless water faucets for quite a while in our facilities, and the only changes that we have made to the restrooms, first, early in the pandemic, we added shoe plates to the doors to allow people to open them without having to come in contact with the handles. And the other thing we did was upgrade lighting to add LED lights. It may be that somebody was in one of those restrooms and they were just a lot brighter and more welcoming and hospitable than they remember the previous visit. So the bottom line is no, we have not engaged any work that was not authorized by the council.
And since I've got the opportunity now to talk about it, I know during that period of time, way back on January 27th, one of the concerns that staff had raised during that period of time was some ADA concerns regarding those upgrades that were going to be made. Now, certainly the building is closed right now, or it's not as utilized as much. I continue to be concerned about those upgrades that need to be made, especially as it relates to the ADA piece. And so I want to just take this opportunity to just advocate for that. I know at this point it doesn't make sense, but I want to be sure that we do not let that drop off of our priority list.
Appreciate that. Thank you, council member.
Council, anything else? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Beloga and a second by Councilmember Carter to adjourn this evening. Hearing no further discussion, Ms. Christensen.
Thank you. Beloga?
Aye.
Carter?
Aye.
Coulter?
Aye.
Lohman?
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Mayor Bussey.
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. We are adjourned. Thank you much to the staff for your work this evening. Thank you to the council members for a very good discussion on a number of items. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who tuned in this evening. We got a little late, but I appreciate you sticking with us. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.